Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So we are starting a bit of a new series. So this is called the Byzantine School Part 1. And when I say it's a bit of a new series, I guess I've been apprehensive to do this for quite a while because I know the amount of work that it would take to keep a series like this going, especially since I've done, 37, I think it is now, eschatology videos. I'm going through James White's The King James Only Controversy, and I've been pretty faithful to do that every week. Now, last week, I wasn't able to do it. One of the reasons is I went to Sydney a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure I got COVID. Looking back, it was probably COVID, and so I'm still coughing and snorting and sneezing a little bit. But at the end of the day, we want to keep moving on. And so one of the reasons why I didn't do the James White thing is because of that. I read through some of his material in the book. And as I mentioned in another video, a lot of the material in the book is just basic, this is what a manuscript is. This is what a papyri is. This is this and this is that. And so it's not really like controversial, the sections that I'm reading at the moment. But I did find something that I do want to talk about, which is his view of Codex Sinaiticus and the Tischendorf theory. And so Tischendorf basically said in his own testimonial that he saved Codex Sinaiticus from the fire. And James White's like, no, that never happened. To say that they found it in a waste paper basket is a lie, sort of thing. And anyone who says that they don't know the details. And so I'm going to go through that and just see what's been said over the years, because he has made this claim. But it does take a bit of effort to go through all that sort of stuff. And so anyway, I guess what I'm saying is the last 2 weeks I've been a little bit out of form, a little bit on the sidelines, but I am moving on and continuing on in what we're doing with this channel, because it is going to take a lot of effort to run a debate channel, to do all the interviews that I want to do, to get guests on. A lot of the time, most of the people who I'm interviewing are in the United States, and there's about a 14-hour difference, I think it's 14, between us here in Australia, where we are, and New York time. So trying to work all that out and get around everyone's schedule, sometimes I've been scheduling things, and the only time that works is 5 o'clock in the morning for me. And so that means I have to be up at 4, and I'm half caffeinated and so it can be pretty full on. But I'm pretty determined. Like in the last few weeks, I guess I've been questioning, do I really want to go down this road? Do I really want to give my time to YouTube? And do I, all this sort of stuff? I do have lots and lots of other projects that, I've never been afraid of starting projects and going, okay, well, we're sort of halfway through it. Should we continue? Because just doing something over and over again, just because you said you'd do it, it's like, well, no, sometimes you just go, well, this actually isn't working. Let's stop it, And I was thinking it is, one of the main reasons I've started the YouTube channel is to get across good theology, to talk about a lot of issues that I really like talking about. Obviously, as a born-again Christian, we want to reach the lost, but this channel's most probably not for that. In a sense, where I do like what Bryan Ross does with his channel. He seems to have a bit of a gospel presentation at the end of each video. I might even do that, just have a bit of a thing. Maybe I can have an outro where it has, the gospel and stuff, because you never know who's watching, But at the end of the day, this is mostly to do with theology. And primarily at the moment, I'm dealing with bibliology and with eschatology. And so, which is really cool. These are topics that I really enjoy. But at the end of the day, I'm sort of like, do I really want to give myself to this? And probably over the last couple of weeks, having not been able to even talk, I'm coughing that much and snorting. And if you've watched my last few videos, I've sort of struggled through them. But I really do want to continue on. So I guess it's been a question like, do I want to do this? I mean, I could spend my time earning money or just doing other things. I've still got a lot, I've done the New Testament here. I've got Psalms and Proverbs pretty much done. They just need proofreading. I've done a lot of the minor prophets, but there's still a lot of work to do with the Old Testament. And I get emails nearly every day. When are you going to do the Old Testament? And it's like, well, it's easier said than done. And I have enjoyed jumping on YouTube and just turning it on and just chatting and enjoying the interaction and banter with other people. But this has been a thing in my mind that I've always wanted to do. Now, I have in the past sort of started doing starting from Matthew 1 and going through the Bible and just going through each Greek word that I know and going through, what the English says and what other Bibles say and what is omitted and what the doctrine means and things like that. And I've enjoyed doing that, and I'll probably will continue on with that type of thing. But sometimes I see that within myself there are certain things lacking. And having interviewed quite a lot of people recently, people like Peter Van Cleek, even just chatting with Matt Singleton, these guys know quite a lot about apologetics, and I don't really know that much about. I guess a lot of it can be just names and stats and figures and stuff like that people talk about in the United States. I guess I do know quite a lot about apologetics when I'm chatting to Australians and people in countries that I've been to. But sometimes it's like I don't know certain denominational acronyms, and I don't know who. There are certain people I know almost nothing about that are really popular in YouTube land. And sometimes I go to listen to their stuff and I'm just like, man, I'm so bored with it. It's like, man, do I have to know everything about this person and that person? But I guess, I've always tried to put the concept of being the jack of all trades, master of one concept, where, knowing a little bit about everything. So you can have a general discussion about anything, but being a master of one. And so I guess bibliology is something that I've gone down this rabbit hole. I'm halfway down the rabbit hole going, do I want to dig further into this, or do I want to pull back? And I think I'm so dedicated to it now that I really want to push it as far as I can possibly go, which means I have to go to the next level. So within myself, I recognize certain failings, certain things that I lack, which I look at some of the reformers, and I think these guys were absolutely legendary. People like Theodore Beza, Stephanus, Erasmus, who we've got on the screen here. These guys were next level. They knew the languages fluently. They could converse in them. They could write fluently letters in Latin. We're still, translating a lot of these things nowadays. And the works of Beza, even just translating the Revelation 16:5 footnote there, absolutely revolutionized the whole argument on Revelation 16:5. So the next level is really just going back. I know the Reformation cry was ad fontes, going back to the sources. But we also want to go back to these guys as well. And we want to do what they did. We want to know what they know. We want to try as hard as we can to put ourselves into their shoes. Now, I know that there are some people who are fluent in several different languages. Someone like Ugales. Like, he is absolutely legendary in his linguistics, and I know he's influenced quite a lot of people. But I guess too, there's the whole thing of we have limited time here on Earth. Do we spend that time learning Greek, learning Latin, doing all this stuff so we can win an argument here and there? And this is one of the things when I was talking to Taylor DeSoto, because some of the things that I'm going to be saying today and talking about, he saw that this as well and went, well, I'm going to learn Greek. I'm going to fluently learn this language. And so anyone who comes my way talking about Textus Receptus issues, I'm going to absolutely smash them. And so he was like, he had one of the best plans that I'd ever seen. And I guess in a way I was, as a bit of a person on the sideline, I was fueling a bit of that. I was saying, do you know about this guy? Do you know about that guy? And he was going through, and oftentimes I know about these certain influential people who can direct you in linguistics and theology and bibliology and stuff like that. But he was taking that and really running with it. And I was inspired by their zeal. But in the interview that we had recently, he basically said, well, I sort of had to look at my motives. I was just sort of doing this just to win an argument, and I was giving myself over to it. I wasn't really giving that much time to family and friends and all the rest of it. And so this is one of the things. It's like we want to live our lives, but we also recognize that we're in a fight, and we're already in a fight. It's not like we're just in preparation and one day there's going to be this big showdown, where it's like in an MMA fight, you're already in the cage, someone's already smacking you up the side of the head, and you're like, well, okay, what do I do? And we can either sort of exit the platform or we can fight. And to fight, we really need to know how the reformers fought and won with this issue, because they did win. And we saw hundreds and hundreds of years of peace on this issue. Yes, sure, the Catholics, the Orthodox, they went in their own ways and everything. But what we would label Protestants, they won this fight. They had the ultimate, the Greek text. They had the King James based upon the Textus Receptus, and it's untouchable. Like today, we look back and say, "Wow, they've done an amazing job," and we can't fault it. We're like, what they've done is amazing. We're so glad they've done it, but they had to fight for it. And so, one thing that I've learned is most of the time, when I have ideas and concepts and things, and I look at other people and think, this person here could do this. They could easily turn around and, be, fluent in Greek, fluent in Latin. That they could be at a level in their scholarship that is amazing. And then I usually see these guys sort of jump out of the ring. And so I guess it's like, back to the fighting thing. You're seeing someone there who's just able to stand up and start, punching their opponent and starting to win. But then they're like, look, I want to go for a walk in the park. I'm not saying that Taylor DeSoto did the wrong thing by bailing out of this, because everyone's got their own, motives and their own, calling, I guess, to what's important to them. And that's one of the things I've been weighing up. Is this, I could spend all this time witnessing, going out street preaching and all that. But then again, usually people say you have to do one or the other, where I think I can multitask. I know some churches, they go out for, half an hour, every week. And they're like, I'm an evangelist and all this. And I'm like, an hour? You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty easy to do. You can go window shopping for an hour. Like most people could easily find an hour out of the week, So, so at the end of the day, I guess what I'm saying is, what I realized, I used to be in this church, and we used to always do, rap songs, metal songs, rock songs, and just make it all focused on Jesus, So we would, play. When I first became a Christian, like I was a pretty good metal guitarist back in the 90s. And so the pastor just said, well, let's just form a metal band. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so, some of the songs were full on, just, you're going to burn in hell. You need to repent. It was just full on preaching, metal style. And then, after a while, it was sort of like, okay, I used to be in the city in Melbourne where that would have been very popular, but we moved to a country town. And so most people are looking at us like, who are these metal guys? It was me and my mates, who got saved. And then after a while, we started mellowing out and, you play a few Keith Green songs and, a bit of Third Day and copy their stuff. But one thing I realized, a lot of bands are so hard to work with. Working with a band can be a nightmare because you've got 4 different personalities, you've got 4 different schedules, and you have to align all this. And you have to do that week in, week out. And oftentimes you'll play this stuff for, 6 months, and by the end of the 6 months, you're actually sick of the songs too. You've learned 12 songs or whatever, and it's like, we're sick of them. Let's change them. It's like, no, that's not the point. We've got to get better at the songs that we know, and just keep practicing them. And so there can be all sorts of things, and people leave the band, then you got to train someone else up. So what I realized was the whole hip hop thing came in, and I jumped straight into that. And we used to get huge crowds. We used to sometimes in our youth group, we used to get like 200 visitors. So we'd be, doing rap, and we would, use Lecrae and all that sort of stuff, and just change a few lyrics here and there so it wasn't as Calvinistic. But we were doing this, and we'd get lots of people. And one of the reasons, the only real reason I did it was because I wanted to inspire the young guys who I used to hear freestyle rap between themselves, just messing around. We go to the beach or something, and they're just like, on the way there, they're doing a bit of a freestyle rap in the car. I'm like, these guys are brilliant. So I was just trying to pioneer, sort of say, hey guys, here's a platform, we can do this, and you can jump on board with this. And so eventually a few of them did, and some of them are actually still doing it today. But I was sort of disappointed in the lack of enthusiasm. And I guess too, the thing is with a youth group, most of what I found is most people who go to a youth group, they're just church kids. They haven't really made a decision whether they really want to serve God or not. And some of them have actually made a decision that they want to leave. They've seen a door out through university or through whatever. They just want to get out that door, get away from mum and dad, and they want to do whatever they want. And so at the end of the day, what I found was I sort of was doing, rap stuff and all the rest of it to get people encouraged so that they could do it. But in the end, I ended up just doing it all. I sort of had this vision of all these young guys, just, because that's what you sort of wanted. And in the previous church group that I was in, well, not previous, but in the church group that I was in at that time that I left in 2007, that was quite a big thing because we would do lots of outreaches. I mean, I went overseas doing it. We'd go around Australia, go to lots of churches, and sometimes there's, 300 people. When I was in Papua New Guinea, that was quite a big thing to do. We'd go on the streets and get a big crowd. And at first it was like, having a reggae band and just playing all that sort of stuff and get a crowd and then preach. But after a while, I've dropped off all of that stuff now because I feel like it's gimmicky, but I was involved with that for years. I'm not saying it's, right, wrong, whatever. I think music is neutral. It's like a syringe. It depends what you put in it. You can put heroin in it, or you can put penicillin in it. It can save someone's life. But at the end of the day, I think the gimmicky sort of stuff of, dangling a carrot in front of someone, come out to a hip hop concert or whatever, and they come out there expecting to, get a bit of Snoop Dogg or, Eminem or whatever. And it's like, oh, sorry, we tricked you. Here's the Jesus stuff. Like, to me, that's not a really good start for someone's Christianity. It's like, oh, they tricked me into it. What else are you going to get tricked into? People are like, well, I don't really like being tricked, and so I won't come again. It's disingenuous. And so the whole reason I'm saying this is oftentimes I see people who have way more talent than myself. They have resources. They could easily get massive crowds. They could do. There's so much wasted talent, and they never step up to the plate. And you sort of, they go, come on, dude, you can do this. And I'm only just using this whole music thing as an example. But I've sort of seen this in this area of bibliology. There are so many people who could absolutely destroy pretty much everyone in the academy. Like if we set up debates with, Tommy Wasserman, Peter Gurry, John Mead, I mean, these guys would just get absolutely pulverized by some people. But not many people are really pushing the battle to the gate, in a sense. And I guess, too, what I've discovered over the years is usually I'll get a good idea and I'm thinking I can get this guy involved, that guy involved, and I get a bunch of people involved. And then you start running the race and you turn around and no one's really running with you. You're by yourself, and it's like, I guess it's my idea now, and that's what I found with the Textus Receptus site that I've got. So a lot of you know that I run this site. Now, when I first initially started this website, it was in 2008. Now, if we go down the bottom here, it can show you the special pages. I'll just open that up, which is the stats and figures. We can go to statistics. Okay. I'll just enlarge in this. So we've had nearly 100 million page views on there, which is a lot of pages. Some of the more popular pages, main page, but 1 John 5:7's had 168,000 people jump just on that one page. Matthew 1:1. A few other sort of obscure things. List of omitted Bible verses. So 86,000 people have gone on there. So one of the reasons why I actually created this website was because it's like Wikipedia. Anyone can edit it. Now, it used to be anyone can jump on and edit it. And so it was completely open. And I didn't know how to make it closed. And so I used to get lots of Russian spam bots. And so I'd spend a lot of time going through and deleting accounts. And there's 10,000 of these accounts, and I still find some every now and then, and I'd go, oh, that's still active, and I'd delete it. They're not really changing anything on the site. They used to just spam stuff on the site, and so I had to go through and delete a whole bunch of pages. But I worked out a way to close it. Okay, so now people email me, and I say, oh, you can edit this, and I've got people who work for me who do it. Now, I don't want to disparage people who have actually jumped on here and helped, because there have been over the years some people have jumped on and they've put up content and stuff like that for free. But I would say 99.999% of the time, it's people who I pay to jump on here. So I've got family over in Pakistan. So I pay them to put this material up. I've got workers in the Philippines. I pay them to put material up there. So a lot of the content, with copy and paste sort of content, is done by them, and then I'm filling in all the details. Because I sort of realized that if I pay someone, in the Philippines or in Pakistan, I can earn that type of money that I pay them in a month, like in 2 days or something like that. So it saves me bogging up all my spare time and just copying and pasting stuff, so I can sort of work on the more academic side of it. But again, it's one of those things where I'm like, I was expecting like a Wikipedia style frenzy of born again Bible believing Christians to jump on board and say, hey, I can edit this too. And so I was expecting just people to go, yeah, I want to edit this. I want to do this. I want to do that. And jumping on there and, correcting things and spell checking and, but at the end of the day, I've realized since 2008, I think it was when this first came up there, since 2008, very, very, very few people have jumped on and helped. And look, I'm not like sitting here going, oh, I'm mad with the world and all that. I'm just stating the facts. This is just what's happened. And sometimes that can be okay too, because people put up information and I'm like, well, that's a bit cringy or it's a bit Ruckmanite, or I'm like, I'm not really sure about that. But I do have lots of people contact me and say, hey, on this page you've got this written, you should really delete that and put this type of information. And I'm like, yeah, cool, that's really good. Now, so I guess this is another project that I've sort of started that I'm like, I'm just going to put the platform there. I'm going to make a platform and everyone else can jump on board and help and all that. And it's like, and no one does. And so it's like, okay, this has become my thing. And so I guess at the end of the day, I'm doing this YouTube thing. And I've been doing it for a couple of years now. I was doing it on Facebook for quite a while, but it's become a little bit more serious since I've jumped on YouTube. And it's getting quite popular. But with popularity, you have to have content. And sometimes you can exhaust your content. You get to the point where you're like, well, what are we going to talk? Are we going to just, badmouth, not badmouth, but, we're going to expose Mark Ward once again for some of the silly things he's saying, or, it just gets to the point where it's like, okay, well, how many videos do we have to make about these guys? And I'm not saying that there's, that's wrong, but, someone has to say, hey, what these guys are saying is wrong. And usually I'll watch one of their videos and be just completely triggered and go, I have to say something about this. And I think that's part of the fight. Now, I'm dedicated to fighting this. I believe that we're going to win. I think that we have so many people on our side now who are interested in the Textus Receptus issue and who are honing their arguments. One thing that really helps me too is I'll listen to someone talk about Revelation 16:5 and they've read my book, or they've listened to one of my debates on it, and they've honed their argument to the point where they're sort of repeating exactly what I would say about it. But sometimes people even put their own little spin and it's better. I'm like, wow, that's really good. And that's always been one thing that I've wanted to do, because in the church that I was talking about where we had all the music stuff, it used to be strong into discipleship. So everything you did was usually because someone else will copy what you're doing. So you better, pull your head in and behave and, go and pray, go and read your Bible, go and street preach and do this and do that because someone's watching and they're going to copy what you're doing. And so I guess it's been ingrained into me that, people will look at what I'm doing and probably replicate it in their own way, sort of thing. Now, there's lots I don't know about. There's plenty of stuff that, people can ask me about, and I'm like, sorry, don't know about it. But when it comes to this issue of the Textus Receptus, I knew that by starting this page and going through lots and lots of different articles and, reading through pretty much every site that's on the internet and data mining for information, and that eventually that stuff will just get into you. It's if you're just bouncing that basketball for 10 years, you'll get good at it. It'll eventually, rub off. So I sort of knew that if I started this page, it'll just keep growing and growing, and it'll eventually get to the point where I know a lot of stuff about this. And so, but it's sort of gotten to the point where, yes, I know a lot of stuff about this, but I'm now listening to some of these, experts, and I'm like, man, we need to get to the next level. We really need to grow. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm starting this series, the Byzantine School. Now, what is the Byzantine School? So I'm going to explain what it is. I'm going to explain how we can be like a neo-Byzantine school or the new Byzantine school. Okay. Where I'm going to go for information. I don't want to hide anything from anyone and say, well, I'm reading this book on the side that's giving me all the information and makes me look good. I want everyone to know where I'm going with this. And I guess, too, I'm going to be challenging people to come along. But usually a lot of people don't. I end up doing this myself. But at the end of the day, that's fine, too. Because I know that one of the best ways to learn something is by teaching it. If you want to learn a language, if you teach it to someone else, you'll usually become an expert at that language. There have been some things about the Textus Receptus that I haven't really known, but even just in exposing some of these videos, I've had to sort of learn a little bit about it. And then as I'm teaching it, I'm like, yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm learning, because we're all growing, and you never stop learning. The whole concept of you learn something in college or in school, or you're training to be a pastor or something, and that's it. That we should spend our life just learning and growing and expanding in our knowledge, and especially something that we enjoy. I think that's a big part of it. Some people don't enjoy this topic; they hate it. I talk to them about the Textus Receptus, blah blah blah, and then to them it's like, I mean, you may as well be just sprouting Mormon terminology to them. They're just like, some people are not interested in Scientology and exposing them. Okay, so I could say, well, Scientology and the Book of Dianetics says this, and L. Ron Hubbard says, and people don't want to even know their names, or they've got no interest in it, and that's fine. But us who we do want to keep fighting this fight, and we believe that we're going to win, we really need to get to the point where we're fighting people, we are winning battles, but we want to get to the point where we are, steroid injected death machines. You know what I mean? I noticed some friends of mine were talking the other day. Apparently, it was on the Joe Rogan podcast that they're going to do an Olympic Games, but you can use substances. You can use steroids. You can be on illegal substances that usually, if you're caught using in the Olympics, you'll be banned forever. But you can use you can do 100-yard dash in using steroids or using all sorts of different drugs. And so I was, and so we were sort of joking about this, but we want to be a machine. And I think there are certain cheats that we can use with technology today that I know we often hear James White saying, oh, Erasmus would have loved to be here today because he'd be a critical text guy and all this. No, I think Erasmus would definitely still be a Textus Receptus guy. Byzantine text would have been his choice. He would have looked at the King James and gone, that's a brilliant work. And the same as Stephanus Beza and the King James guys. Yeah, James White has this historic revisionism that they would just jump into his camp. But these guys, they were learning Latin and Greek and, theology and reading the early church writers. And they were doing that in an age where it was quite hard to get a lot of good information. I know that these were the top scholars of the day. So that does make a difference. When you look at the average Joe, yes, they don't have access to everything. But we actually do have access to even greater things than these guys have. Now, I believe when it comes to, the majority of manuscripts and the amount of manuscripts that Erasmus looked at, I think he probably saw more manuscripts than the Center for New Testament manuscripts has ever seen or ever photographed. I think he would have gone to libraries where there were hundreds, perhaps even thousands of manuscripts. But at the end of the day, how does this apply to us? Well, I think we can teach ourselves original languages, Hebrew, Greek, even Latin. Now, I want to learn these languages. When I was young, I was like, I just want to learn those languages, and then I'll win every apologetics debate ever. And so, you start learning. And what I've discovered is the Christian way, the Christian apologist's way of learning these languages is basically fake it until you make it. Don't let anyone know your level of where you're actually at. Just sort of have this air about you that I know the languages, and if you mess with me, I will pull out a Greek word and you'll suffer, sort of thing. But I think we've got to be more honest about it, because the more honest we are about these things, we need to be totally transparent. We need to be totally honest about where we're at, what our level is, what our understanding is. And because if we want to grow, we can't, like, I understand the whole concept of fake it until you make it. And there is that concept as well. Like some people do fake it and then they make it, But I think we need to drop the whole air of, hey, I'm a Greek scholar, when realistically the vast majority of apologists, they can hardly even say hello, how are you, in Greek. They couldn't count to 10, And so we want to change that. We want to actually be the type of scholar that we think we should be. And we want to not fake it till we make it. We actually want to make it, or at least to a certain level, the best level that we possibly can get to. And I believe that this will help us in all of our areas. It's not just like we're going to be doing something that's not really beneficial at all. It's just like an academic exercise, and we're just going to waste a lot of time. I think that by doing this, it's going to sharpen our pencil, not only in the area of bibliology, which is obviously the main focus for me at the moment, but it's going to help us with our eschatology. It's going to help us with our soteriology. It's going to help us with our angelology, anthropology. There's so many things that are going to be helped by understanding the original sources, understanding original languages, and knowing where to go for answers. And the thing is, I'm not teaching this from a perspective where I know this stuff. I'm doing this because I don't know it. This is a weakness of mine. I dropped out of high school. I didn't care about learning at school. I dropped out, and sure, I could read a book, but it wasn't until I became born again. It was actually that Seventh-day Adventist guy, Ben Carson, who a lot of Americans know because he's been involved with the Trump administration. Now he's, in a cult, but he had a really amazing story about how he went sort of from zero to hero. In grade 5 in his school, he was the worst kid in the class. And then he started reading, 2 books a week. His mum put him on this strict routine. And eventually he became a brain surgeon and did the first hemispherectomy, which was the separation of Siamese twins. And so very interesting guy, when it comes to understanding things, a certain pattern that you can mold yourself on. It doesn't really matter, if he was a born again Christian or a Catholic or Seventh-day Adventist or a Muslim or whatever. Usually we look at those things and go, well, he's done really well. And so that's the same as someone like Ugales. Alexander, I think his name is Alexander Ugales. So I'll just pop him up here. Now, some of you guys already know who he is. So this is the guy who does the language teaching videos. He's a polyglot. He knows about 60 languages. Now, can you imagine having someone like this on our team, in a sense, where he's dominating the academic situation in bibliology? He's confronting the academy in Munster and pulling their arguments to shreds. Someone who knows this many languages, that would be a huge benefit to our cause. And but the chances of recruiting someone like this and getting him working for us and doing all that, it's pretty slim. But I'm sure that there are people out there who do know languages, who can get to the point where they can go through and read Greek, read Latin, and read Hebrew to the point of a proficient level where we don't just look like those apologists who are going around saying agapeo and phileo, the God's love and the love of a pizza. We're not looking like idiots, We want to grow. We want to expand our understanding. So basically, what I'm going to do, so I should really just go through and explain, because I'm sort of getting into some weedy things. So I should really explain what the Byzantine school is. Okay, so I'll just grab a few websites here. Now I might just go through these comments first, just so I don't get too far behind. So Helg is in the house. Greetings from a cold summer in Norway. This should be interesting. Wow, cold summer. We are cold here in Australia at the moment. That's why I got a jacket on. And it looks like there's going to be a bit of snow heading our way. We usually don't get snow here where we are. I don't think we've ever gotten snow. I think maybe once. But in the Highlands, just 3 hours drive from here, there could be snow this week. So that'll be interesting. Avery F says, very ambitious for a half-caffeinated scholar. You're the man for the job, I believe. Yeah, well, I guess I'm just putting myself out there and going, well, let's do this. But I do acknowledge and recognize that, I've got a lot of faults. And the more people that jump onto the channel, subscribe, because we just went over 700 subscribers, as Docky just mentioned here, lots of people are going to then hold me more accountable. And I know that, and I understand that. The more people looking at you, the more critical eyes. But I actually enjoy criticism. I embrace it. Sometimes people turn around and say some pretty nasty things, and it's like, well, it's true. You just got to acknowledge when it's true. So Pastor Brett's saying, Desiderius Erasmus. Everyone's just living the dream in the chat. So James Sheffield says, keep the caffeine flowing. I enjoy your YouTube. Well, thanks, James. It was very good interviewing your son, Jonathan Sheffield. James, saw you comment on Foskey's video. Brilliant. I haven't seen that one yet. Hello, Brett. Translate the Latin into Greek and fix grammar. I love that. Oh, yeah. The whole 1 John 5:7. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Trickery to promote Jesus, not a good evangelism method. Yeah, and it was actually a scripture where it said, not of deceit. I'll just grab that. Not of deceit, I think it is. 1 Thessalonians 2:3. Okay. Now, I'll just read this in the context. So it says, for you yourselves, brethren, I may as well just throw this here. Blow it up a little bit. For you yourselves, brethren, know our entrance in unto you, that it was not in vain. But even after we had suffered before, and were shamefully entreated, as ye know, at Philippi, we were bold in our God to speak the gospel of God with much contention. So that they're bold to preach, even though people were persecuted. And it says here, for our exhortation was not of deceit, nor of uncleanness, nor of guile, but as we were allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, which trieth our hearts. For neither at any time use we flattering words, as you know, or a cloak of covetousness, God is witness. Nor of men sought we glory, neither of you, nor yet of others, when we might have been burdensome as the apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. Being so affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted to you, not the gospel of God only, but also our own souls, because ye were dear unto us. So it's mostly verse 3 here, so I might just grab that one up. I can't remember if there's another verse that says a very similar thing. Okay, looks like 2 Corinthians 4:2 says a very similar thing. Might get that one. Yeah, because I think it's a very important thing to know and understand. King James says, but we have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. It says here, for neither at any time did we use flattering words. So that's the same chapter there. But yeah, so I am pretty sure it is this verse, which says, for our exhortation was not of deceit. Okay. So they're telling them to get saved. It's not, they're not deceiving them into a situation where it's like, lift up your hand. Now I've been pressured as a non-Christian. I remember going to the church that I was involved with here, and I went to the church and I didn't really understand anything, because I guess I was so deceived and filled with demons and all the rest of it. And I went, I think it was about a year and a half before I actually became a Christian. And so I didn't really understand it. And they were saying, yeah, lift up your hand, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I guess I'd never been in that sort of, I'd never been to a church service like that ever. And then at the end, a guy come up to me and said, hey, I noticed you didn't lift your hand, but do you really want to lift your hand? I'm like, no. He's like, why don't you want to give your life to Jesus? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, what's giving your life to Jesus? I don't know what you're talking about. And he just kept pressuring me, and to the point where I would, just to get him off my back, I was like, okay, whatever. And he's like, well, say this prayer after me. And then, I sort of just said it just to get him away from me. And I was like, sure, I'm going out for a smoke. I went outside and people were congratulating me and shaking my hand saying, wow, you prayed, you've become a Christian. I was just like, man, this is weird. And looking back, it was just, they're just putting on pressure just to get you another number. It's like, yes, we had one saved that night. We had 12 visitors and one saved, it was like, and I noticed too, I remember one time I was in New Guinea. Now, I'm not dissing this guy at all. Like, he's a nice guy. I really like him. But he was really old school. And so most of the time I'd do street preaching in New Guinea. We would see crowds of 100, 200, 300, sometimes 400 people, and like heaps of people crowding around. And so I've sort of realized that you don't, like, I'm not there to do an altar call in public, you know what I mean? But if someone does that, that's fine. So this guy, that was what he wanted to do. He started preaching and he said, look, if you really want to dedicate your life to Jesus, now's a really good time. And I'd been to that place many times, and I knew the vast majority of people who were in the audience were church people. Papua New Guinea's like that. There's so many churches. Most people go to a church. Probably half the audience are Christians. There's Catholics and SDAs, but there's quite a lot of saved people there, So he didn't really say, if you want to give your life to Jesus, put your hand up. He sort of said, if you really want to commit your life to God and, keep on with God or something like that, he said, just, lift your hand up and I'll see that hand, And so, hands were going up everywhere, He's like, I see the hand, I see the hand, I see the hand. And I'm sort of like, why is he doing this sort of thing like it's an altar call, like they're getting saved, And then later on, he was saying, wow, we saw 23 people get saved. And I was like, no. You worded it in a way where it's like, if you want God to help you, who wouldn't want that? And so I've sat in, I know I'm diverting from the Byzantine school, but I guess we've got to talk about modern Christianity. When I used to go to a church here in the town, in the morning, and then I would go over back to when I was living in Byron Bay to a church there, and I'd go to their afternoon evening service, which finished about 6 o'clock. Then if I drove up to Queensland, I would be able to get an evening service in one of the churches up there. So it was like a Sunday, nothing much on, nothing's open. And so I would just go to these different churches. And so I did that for quite a while. Now, I've found this church called Generation Church. Okay, so most of the time I'm just Googled it. It comes up. I'm like, all right, that's where I'm going. They've got a church service that starts in 20 minutes. I'm going there. I'm going to check it out. So I go there, and it's like a full Hillsong type of thing. There's heaps of young people, and I'm like, cool. These people are into God. That's great. There's some churches you go to and they're dead. And so anyway, the guy got up and sort of preached, and I'm like, false doctrine, pressure, that's weird. But there was a few things that he said. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. And I didn't talk to anyone. I just went there, sat in the middle, and I looked like the daggiest guy there because I was just dressed like I am now, and everyone else was all young and fresh and jumping up. And, I'm like, I'm not jumping. I'm sort of clapping along. So they're like, oh, we know he's a Christian. He's clapping. And then they had an altar call. Now, the only way that I can explain this altar call to you is by telling you every detail, like doing a chronological sort of thing. So it started off fine. The guy's like, if you really want to give your life to Jesus, and I was like, well, at least they're doing a proper sort of altar call, whether you're into altar calls or not, I can sort of take them or leave them or whatever. But they were doing a pretty good one. It was, they were preaching the gospel in it. But then I was there, like, just thinking about it, and I'm like, because it's every head bowed, every eye closed, so I'm like focused on it. And then the double bass drums started, like, and it started going, and he's like, he started going up a key, he's like, you really want to give your life to Jesus, and then the drums started, he's like, and if you really want to, so it started to become like a horse race announcer. If you really want to give your life to Jesus Christ, and then the drummer started hitting the snare, and then the bass started, and then because I'm used to the nice soft altar call, I used to be the guitarist who did all that. But this is like next level. It's like, you feel like you're in a dubstep, like you've gone to a nightclub or something, and the music's just going, and I'm there with my head bowed, eyes closed, and I'm sort of like laughing to myself, like, this is rad, this is full on. And then it was like, I see that hand, and then it went up a key, and I was like, they're gonna keep going, like key changing up through the altar call. And that's what they did. They just kept key changing. And his voice got higher and more intense, and it started getting higher and more intense, and it started like, I can see the hand. I can see the hand. Oh, hallelujah. And then there must have been about 50 people who, it was like, stand up and come down the front and give your life to Jesus. And people were standing up and running down the front. And I was like, I don't know if I'm really rejoicing in this, or, you know, that these people are answering this altar call, or if I've just experienced the altar call and modern manipulation. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So James Sheffield, amazing grammar fix. Critical text folk have nothing like it. Where can I find your book? So if you go to Amazon and Revelation 16:5. If you just type in Revelation 16:5 and Amazon, now look, I don't sell these. These are sold by the Dean Burgon Society guy, H.D. Williams. So I have no say in how much they cost. If you want to get this in just a Word document form, like sort of like a draft form of this, I'll just send it to you for free. Like, the main reason that it's in print is because I got asked to do it in print, because I had sort of like a it was a draft form, but a lot of people were reading it, and so the Trinitarian Bible Society, Dean Burgon Society, they asked me to do this, and so I just said, yeah, that's cool. So I have no say in their sales or pricing or whatever. But yeah, so that's where you can find it. But if if my email address is this, AUSCLIX @ and if you just go to Gmail after that, you'll find me, and so I can send you a Word doc on that. Matthew 16:18 Greek translation. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. Byzantine Catholic. Oh, okay, so this is the same guy who's sort of talking about Catholic stuff quite a bit. So Pastor Brett says, are we starting a school of theology? Yes, and I'm going to be challenging myself to learn certain things. I'm going to be challenging, I'm going to be challenging you guys to learn certain things. Look into the Aramaic. Yes, we will be looking at the Aramaic. That is, Tremellius was very good at the Aramaic, and so he was a Jewish guy who got converted to Catholicism. Then a year later, he converted to the Reformation, and he became good friends with Beza. His nephew, I think it was, Janius, he was expert in Arabic. Pastor Brett says, I'm multilingual. I only speak 3 languages, but I'm fluent in New Testament Greek and I read Latin. I'm still working on interpretation. And so that's really good. And so this is one of the things where we want to drag people up to a certain level on these issues. So yeah, 60 languages. Yeah, that's insane. Following Truth, LJ, I speak 3. Okay, one of those not well. I know 60 is just crazy. It takes so long to learn just one. Pastor Brett, I speak Spanish, English, and American Sign. Okay, yeah, a lot of Americans speak Spanish. I guess it's just a huge influence of South America there. I'm fluent in New Testament Greek, but I want to learn conversational Greek. Nick knows the modern Greek. Well, I'm definitely not fluent. I would never say that I'm fluent. But say, like this guy here. Where am I? Where is he gone? Now I've got so many pages open. Yeah. Alexander Ugales. So he, on his previous website, I think it's been taken down, but on his previous website, he had a list of languages. So he just had, like, I think it was alphabetical order, like, you know, Arabic and Aramaic and, you know, Amharic. And so he would go through and rate his level of fluency. So he would only call himself absolutely fluent in a language if he was at like a university level. So you're talking about a guy who was teaching Arabic in a school in Korea to Korean speaking people. You know what I mean? Like that type of level. And he would say that's fluent. To be able to do that is fluent in a language. So yeah, I really want to look at some of his models of learning and go through some of these. So basically with the Byzantine school, and I still haven't really described what it is, we want to learn languages, yes, but we also want to learn theology. We want to learn the writings of the early church writers. We want to become familiar with who they are, because oftentimes when we're defending the Textus Receptus, the King James, we're just going, okay, Cyprian said this, and Eusebius in his book, he has this quotation, but oftentimes we're not even knowing who they are. So we want to be that concept of a jack of all trades, master of one. We want to do some deep dives into who these people are. And people like Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, the King James translators, they knew this stuff as like a bog standard level of just to get their foot in the door to be a pastor oftentimes, or to be a leader, or, you know, but then they would take it to the next level. And you know, someone like Henry Saville, like he did the complete works of Chrysostom into print form. And so that type of things, like full next level. But if I talk to a lot of Christians who are defending the Textus Receptus, they don't even know who Chrysostom is. They just know it's a name, early church. And so we want to do some dives into that. When I'm talking about Erasmus and Aldus Manutius and Lorenzo Valla and Minetti and Tremellius and Janius, people are like, what are all these names? And it's not really until you familiarize yourself with these people that you get to the point where you can understand what's being said at a different level. And so I want to push through and learn more and more about these men, about their methods, about their influences. And we want to look at their sources. We want to look at what they've said in their printed text and go back and sort of figure out where they're getting this information from, why their worldview is shaped in a certain way, what their presuppositions are, and things like that. Pastor Brett says Dwayne Green reads that modern Greek. Matthew 16 says they think they got baptized without water. They think you got baptized without water. No. Pastor Brett, I preach the gospel and I leave the salvation issue to the Holy Ghost. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things where in the previous church I was in, they used the New King James, which says, go into all the world and make disciples of all nations in Matthew 28, where I believe that's almost an impossibility. It says, go into all the world and teach all nations. There's a difference between making a disciple and teaching them, because you can't actually make a disciple. A disciple makes themselves. They submit unto the word of God, and they become a learner. They become a disciple. You can't get someone and say, I'm going to make you my disciple. You know, usually after a while, you'll have to use heavy, leadership tactics and heavy shepherding and all this. And most of the time they'll leave, or they'll become this, twice as much a son of hell as yourself. They'll start manipulating other people. And we don't want anyone to be manipulated into the things of God. We want people to willingly, out of their free will, I know I've just upset a lot of people, out of their free will, out of their own desire to go, well, I want to serve God. I want to learn this. I want to think about this. And instead of like, oh, well, you know, I better jump through the hoops. That's what he said to do, you know, or to be in ministry, I better just start, you know, being like the dog who wants the biscuit and, you know, jump up on my back legs. And so Matthew 16 says, go into all the nations teaching, go into all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Yes, very good verse. Pastor Brett, I tell people to get on their knees and talk to the Lord. Ask him to reveal himself to you. Don't do it to appease the preacher, let alone get alone with the Lord. Yes. And that's what I usually say when I'm street preaching. I say, look, you just pray to God in your own words. And I also just recommend that they read the Bible. If I want to know what God says, just go to the Bible, specifically the New Testament, open it up, and God will speak directly to you. Yes, and he will speak to you. Very good. Believe and be baptized. Yes, you believe for your salvation, and you become baptized in obedience to God, not for your salvation. Too funny, Nick. Yeah, I think that's talking about the altar call. I'm dying over here, though. Thanks, Nick. I'll go to Amazon, ozclicks@gmail. Awesome. I study Greek under William Mounce. Okay, so that's Bill Mounce, I'm guessing, the one who's written books on that. Yes, Bill Mounce. Amen. Yes, so that's a huge resource too, where you know the Greek language. We want to get our debates to the next level, so we're not just debating, and not only just debates on this program, but just our general interaction with people. We don't want to just be talking about the original language material. And excuse me, I've just got to just blow my nose a little bit. We want to be interacting with people and teaching them why it's important to go to original language material. And so I know when I would listen to some of D.A. Waite's material, even though I'm not a fundamentalist Baptist, he was quite good he would explain, say, a certain word, like we've looked at deceit here. He would go to the Greek word, and then he would show wherever else this word appeared in the New Testament. And it was quite helpful because it just gave you a broad understanding of how that word was used. And I think that's a very helpful way of looking at Greek. But specifically when we're dealing with how words are translated, and we're oftentimes not just only arguing about the choices that the critical text people have, where they turn around and say, you know, we believe, you know, 1 John 5:7 should be out, the last 12 verses of Mark, and the Pericope Adulterae, and all these other verses should be deleted, and all the rest of it. But a lot of the argumentation comes down to the definition of terms. And so while I believe that we can get to the point without really even understanding the original languages, to where we know that certain scholars who have a certain credibility in the Reformation, like King James translators, etc., that if we just look up Oxford English Dictionary, we can see what their choices were and what it exactly means. And so, and oftentimes you'll find that in the old Greek lexicons. But we want to be able to go to that ourselves and sort of take it to the next level, because we're sort of doing this in a roundabout way, which is fine. We're still getting there, but we want to shortcut that. We want to get to the point where we know these languages well, where we are not intimidated to jump into the debate octagon with someone who knows the languages really well, where we can easily spar with them, knowing what they know. And oftentimes what I'm finding is that the modern day apologists, they don't really know Greek. They're just pretending. But we don't want to pretend. We don't want to be like, oh, I know Greek and all this sort of stuff. I'm not saying that you're saying this, Pastor Brett, but we want to actually know it. And so it's just part of our arsenal. We want to know what the early church writers wrote about. And when we're quoting someone and we're saying, well, this, Gregory Nazianzus said this, we want to know who that is and what his beliefs were. And we want to go, like, one thing that I really did enjoy when I came under the radar of James White and I was going through a lot of his dividing line programs, and oftentimes he'd talk about the TR guy, which was me. I actually really enjoyed some of his lessons. They were mostly on his church YouTube account, I think, but he had like 30 lessons of church history. And I would go through that and I was like, well, this is really good stuff. And he was sort of saying, no one is really teaching this. No one's teaching church history. And, not everything James White does is wrong. I really felt that, sometimes I would guide people to that, people who I knew were sensible people. They were TR people, King James people, and they would say, oh, have you got anything, where I can learn stuff? And I'd say, well, jump on James White's thing. He does say a lot of really interesting things, and it would trigger thoughts of, I'll study into this person or this other person. And so Pastor Brett says, I'm in, bud. I'm going to write a book in defense of the KJV and how the KJV defends itself. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. It will be a simple presentation for the equipping of the saints. Now, that's great. And that's really interesting that you studied under Bill Mounts, because his material, sometimes it's at loggerheads with some of the Calvinistic material of James White, Dan Wallace. They all talk about John 3:16, and they can be at loggerheads over the way that certain words are translated. But that's the sort of thing we want to know. We want to grow. We want to learn more and more about this. So anyway, I'm going to explain what the Byzantine school is. So here we are. We're looking at Erasmus. So let's get Erasmus. So the Byzantine school is, from what I can gather, the Byzantine school was in Italy and in Venice. So I'm going to read through this section here. So this is on my website. Oftentimes I'll go through a video and I'll hear a little snippet about Erasmus, and so I'll jump onto my website and put this information in. If I can footnote it, I will. Sometimes it's like it's hard to footnote everything because then you're just basically writing an academic article where oftentimes it's just information that's just out there. And so if I'm listening to someone talk about Erasmus, sometimes they're not offering all the footnotes. So I'll just put it in there, and hopefully later on I'll get to the point where a section like this has 15 footnotes that we can all go to. But I'll just read through this. And so, thanks, Pastor Brett. I know it's probably getting late in the US there. But I'll just read through this, and this will show you the Byzantine school and what it was back in Erasmus's time and in the days of Aldus Manutius. We want to try and get into this type of, what would you say, atmosphere, where you look at Erasmus. Erasmus had he had the reputation of being the world's best Latin scholar, but then he had the reputation of being the world's best Greek scholar. So this was a huge benefit to to us with the Textus Receptus because we go to the Latin, we go to the Greek, we go to the early church writings. Erasmus could read them fluently. He could get Jerome and read through it in Latin. He knew certain nuances of certain words that were that in the Latin it was said in a certain flavor, and he could understand that. So what I'm trying to do, I'll read through this. We'll just get a bit of a feel for the atmosphere that Erasmus was in this time period. And we want to sort of put our feet into this pond here. And we want to know what these men knew. It's almost like an impossible task. But we want to try to understand at least what's going on. So Erasmus, he arrived in Italy, okay? I'll make this large. Okay, now I've ruined my spot. And I'll have a sip of my drink. Erasmus visited Italy in 1506 and spent 3 years there. He went to Italy primarily to perfect his knowledge of Greek. So he already knew the Greek, but he wanted to perfect his knowledge of it. He arrived in the town of Bologna. So it's not just a Weird Al Yankovic thing, why Bologna? In time to witness the triumphal entry, 1506, of the warrior Pope Julius II at the head of a conquering army, a scene that figures later in Erasmus's anonymously published satiric dialogue, Julius Exclusus e Coelus, written in 1513 to 1514. Erasmus intended to obtain a doctorate from the University of Bologna, but had not acquired other necessarily scholarly titles to gain admission. Thus, he proceeded to the University of Turin and then to Bologna University. He abode with Paolo Bombascio. So that's the Bombacius guy that we often hear about from James White, who was the curator at the Vatican Library later on in his life. So obviously here he's not. He's in Bologna. So he abode with him. He was a professor of Greek there. So he abode with him for 13 months. This introduced Erasmus to the upper echelon of Greek scholarship of that era. So he's gone to Italy. He's gone to Bologna. Now, I'm just going to jump on Google Maps, and we'll just show you where Bologna is. Okay, so here we go. Very nice looking city there. But let's go to the maps. Okay, let's zoom out. So we can see it's just near Venice. Very interesting. So near Florence. So we want to look at the Renaissance that happened in Florence. Obviously, between Venice and Florence, you've got Bologna, and this is all north of Rome. And it's only a hop, skip, and a jump over to Geneva from there, which is quite interesting. When you think of that, to go from Venice to Rome, it's almost the same distance, a little bit further, but to go from there to Geneva, just even understanding the locale of certain places can really help you in your studies. And so, but we see Rotterdam here. That's where Erasmus came from. He was in London for quite a while. Then he's in Bologna. Then he's in Venice. But he was in Italy for 3 years. Okay. On the 28th of October, 1507, Erasmus wrote to Aldus Manutius, the Venetian printer. Now, we're going to look at who Aldus Manutius is. Some of you might already know. But if you don't know, this will help you in your defense of Erasmus and his scholarship, because Aldus Manutius was basically, he is considered the best printer of Greek material ever. There are books about how the Irish saved civilization. Well, people have turned around and said, no, Aldus Manutius, he saved civilization. There were so many books of that era that went through Aldus that were Greek manuscripts that went through Aldus and came out in his print shop, that he basically saved a lot of these Greek tales, Euripides and Homer, and many of these books from just going into obscurity. So he's a Venetian printer. So Venetian just means you're from Venice. At this time, the Aldus press had become the most prominent press printers in Europe and had already produced many Greek works. Erasmus requested that Aldus print his Latin translation of the two plays of Euripides and the Hecuba and Iphigenia and Aulus. Although both already printed at Paris, Erasmus knew the superior printing of Aldus, with his invention of the famous Aldino type or italic, would be more favorable. It was in this letter that Erasmus also mentioned the publication of the Greek text of the New Testament, a project Aldus had also said he himself desired to accomplish. In 1508, Aldus published Erasmus's thousands of proverbs, ad agiorum chilades. It sounds like a Mexican dish. Erasmus also visited Rome. Okay, so then we'll read this Venice part. Okay, so this is where this Byzantine school really started. So here we have Erasmus, already well known for his Greek, well known for his Latin. He goes to England for a while, then he jumps over to Italy, and he visits Venice. He's with Aldus, and he's basically learning as much as he can of the Greek language. His books that he's printing were like 3,000 Greek proverbs. So these 3,000 Greek proverbs, they obviously you have to read a lot of Greek to get 3,000 Greek proverbs. You imagine getting 3,000 English proverbs. How many English books would you have to read to get that? Nowadays we just Google things, but we're talking about before Greek was being printed in this fashion. Like there were a few Greek books out there, but very few. Now Erasmus had read them all, engulfed them all. He had learnt from Aldus a lot of things, and so he's gone straight to the source. Now, 1 month after writing to Aldus in December of 1507, Erasmus arrived in Venice in January 1508, in time to see the accomplishment of the printing of his Euripidean plays. Erasmus rose to become one of the greatest Greek linguists of the entire Reformation era. He spent much of his time with Venetian printer Aldus Manutius and Aldus's Greek Academy, which had within it a core of Byzantine scholars. So he had a whole bunch of Greek people working for him, had a whole bunch of scholars surrounding his print shop, offering to him manuscripts and things like that needed to be printed and proofread and all the rest of it. So this is what I'm saying about the Byzantine school. So these are Byzantine scholars. And so I'll keep reading through this, but this is what I really want to do with this Byzantine school is we want to jump in both feet into all of this type of material. We want to look at Byzantine manuscripts. We want to read original language documents. We want to try and at least understand what Aldus knew, what Erasmus knew, what Bombasius knew, who these Byzantine scholars were, the history of this, who Lorenzo Valla was, because sometimes there can just be a few little keys here and there that help us to understand what happened in the Reformation era. And if we're just going to go with a cursory look at this era of history, we will always have a poor apologetic when it comes to the they'll say the creation of the Textus Receptus by Erasmus. We can't just ignore that Erasmus had a lot of involvement in this. So we really need to understand what's happened. We need to look at Aldus Manutius, because he was the first one to ever print the Greek Bible into a printed form. He did 6 chapters, and then Erasmus is saying, I want to do this. And then Aldus Manutius, he worked on the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then eventually that was printed in 1518, so 2 years after Erasmus had printed his. And at the same time, you've got the Complutensian scholars working on their material. So we want to look at them. We want to be familiar on like a first name basis with who all of these guys are. So he spent his first 10 months in Venice working as a proofreader at the publishing house, working on such works as Plutarch's Moralia. The first publication of his Adages in Paris in 1500, followed by the Enchiridion Militis Christiani in 1504, caused Erasmus to become a well-known scholar. Okay, so I've got that Erasmus's, which is obviously wrong. When the Aldine Press published Adages in 1508, this caused Erasmus's reputation as a Greek scholar to be established throughout Europe, as Aldus had aimed to print all of the Greek classics of the ancient world. His research using Manutius's resources and Greek scholars enabled him to expand his collection of proverbs from 819 entries to 3,260 entries. Okay, so for some reason I thought it was 2,000 originally and then 5,000. So it was 819 and then it was 3,260. Okay. The Aldine Press published this newly expanded collection of proverbs, Adigorum Chiliades, in 1508. Erasmus stayed at Aldus's house for 7 months, January to September 1508. He shared a room with Girolamo Alindoro, who compiled a lexicon Greco-Latinum, 1512. So even just that information, like I've written this, I put that there, and I must have just heard that, threw it in there. He lived with a guy, it seems like for 7 months, who did a Greek Latin lexicon. It's like, staying with, Webster, who did the Webster's Dictionary. This is huge, just that one little bit of information. This is why I want to dive into the Byzantine school. I want to know all about these people. I want to know what they knew about. And even if we just keep peeling back the layers, we're like, okay, let's look at, who this guy is. Let's look at, even just the travels of Erasmus can show you a lot about him. Even what he published, sometimes that can help, because we see, like say with the Comio Hanium, that when he did a paraphrase of the Bible, he actually had the Comio Hanium in it, in his edition, which is quite interesting. And that was in 1521, so that was before his 1522 edition. So he did this guy, I won't try and pronounce his name again, Latin Greco-Latinum in 1512, and an introductory Greek grammar, the Emmentale in Inductiorum in Nominum. Actually, I won't say all that in Latin. But I do want to be able to say it in Latin, and I do want to be able to know what it means. And edited Greek text by these guys. Okay. So yeah, he's living with this guy, and he's working on all this sort of stuff. And then
Then he goes to Basil, and then he goes on with the rest of his life. But this era here, he has specifically gone, he's learnt Greek, and then he's gone to Italy to perfect his Greek, because he knew that Constantinople had fallen. Many of the scholars, so let's just look at this on this map. Many of the scholars had come from what's now called Istanbul, and they were in Venice. So lots of the scholarship, leadership, they had gone to Rome, to Florence, to Venice, and they'd taken the Greek culture, they'd taken Greek manuscripts with them. So this caused a huge revival in Greek learning of that era. And so we're mostly focusing in on what happened in Venice, but we also want to look at everything else. So this is just an introduction into that. So I'm going to go into some of the things that we want to consider and think about. So firstly, we want to look at Erasmus and what he knew. So Erasmus, he obviously knew the Greek language. So he knew that very well. He knew the Latin language. Now, one thing about Erasmus that a lot of people don't realize is that he was an Augustinian monk, and part of his training was to do copying, scribal copying of manuscripts. So back in when he was growing up, there would have been very few books around, and he would have been given manuscripts that he was told to copy. So he was going through copying Latin manuscripts. So obviously in the church in those days, you just learnt Latin. That's what everything was in. The Vatican, they still have the official language as Latin. And so this, for him, he would have known Latin as fluently as you and I know English, and probably even more so to a university level of fluency. He would have known that language. So then for probably about maybe, I think it was 5 years before he's seen Aldous, he was already saying that he's learning Greek. And so I'll just type in Greek in this argument. Here in 1505, so this is just before he went to Italy. I shall sit down with Holy Scripture with my whole heart and devote the rest of my life to it. All these years I've been working entirely at Greek and have not been playing with it. So in 1505, he's already reached a certain level of fluency, and then he's gone in 1506 over to learn more over in Italy. He ends up in Venice, and he ends up with the main guy who's printing Greek works. And so, and he lives with him. Yeah, he's living with Aldous, and he is working as a proofreader. So, yeah, when we go through the history here, we can see, where he's gone. He's in England, like 1498. And the thing is, too, he's in England and he's associating with Thomas More, John Colet, Hugh Latimer, all these huge names of that era. He's associating with them. So this is the type of scholarship that he knew, which is very important. Now, what we will probably do, because I'm going to leave everything open-ended as to the direction of where this goes, because all I've really got in my mind is that we want to get ourselves into this era, okay? The era of when he was in Italy, and specifically in Venice, where Aldous' Greek Academy, which had within its core of Byzantine scholars. And so he had a whole core of Byzantine scholars working with him. We want to jump into this era, understand what Erasmus did, understand, his knowledge, his learning, what level of Greek was he at? Obviously, it was world class. Other people talk about Erasmus, Thomas More, John Colet, Hugh Latimer. There are many books written about Erasmus. A lot of his letters have been republished. Many of them have been translated into English, so we can enjoy those. But so we're going to look at the life of Erasmus, but we also want to look at the life of many people around him. And so we don't just want to focus just on Erasmus, because many people already have been poisoned against Erasmus, okay? Because obviously the vast majority of these people, everyone, is Roman Catholic in this era. But then if you fast forward it 20 years, you've got Lutherans, you got the Reformation's been sparked off in Europe, and the Inquisitions, you got the Council of Trent, eventually, trying to get rid of all of Erasmus's works and putting them on the forbidden list and all this type of thing. But we at least want to understand what's happened here and what he's talking about, because a lot of these books, they're in the names are in Latin, but to know exactly what they're about, and or even just to pronounce them, I mean, it can be pretty hard. But we want to be able to go through this era and basically come out the other end, because we want an end game here. We don't want to just be a rudderless ship. We want to know as much as we can about Erasmus, and also about Aldous, also about the Complutensian polyglot guys, also about this Byzantine school that they had, or filled with Byzantine scholars. We want to know about the works that they were working on. We want to be familiar with those works. We want to look at those original documents. We want to even look at their influences, people who came beforehand. So we're looking at people like, or even like understanding who Ruckman was. That's very important to understanding who Erasmus was. Looking at Lorenzo Valla, Erasmus printed his works. Bessarion, looking at him, he was involved with a lot of manuscripts. Looking at Manetti, the work that he did and how that influenced Erasmus. So there's a lot that we want to look into, and a lot of it's unfamiliar to many people. I know enough about this to sort of navigate my way through it, but definitely there's so much I need to just learn about this era. Now, I'm going to be looking for material. There is a really good video. I'm just going to grab this. So if we look up Aldus Manutius, there he is there. So he's the printer who Erasmus lived with. Now there is a video, a YouTube video. Okay, so even 2 months ago, someone's done After Hours with Aldus Manutius. I'm pretty sure I watched that. But it's not coming up in red. But I am pretty sure that I have watched that. So anyway, yes, I have watched it. Or I listened to it. It was quite fascinating. So they're going through all sorts of different documents, and we want to jump into all this sort of stuff. So one video, this is it, how Aldus Manutius saved civilization. So I'm going to put this in the mix. Now, I would encourage everyone to watch this and become familiar with this type of thing. Now, I'm not sure if this is under copyright. Some of these videos are under copyright. It actually doesn't look like there is any copyright here. And I guess too, if I'm just doing a critique of it, it should be fine. So what I might do this might be the next thing that I do, is actually go through and we will examine what's being said here about Aldus Manutius, because he is a very important character to know about. And we'll go through that one first, and then we can go to some of these other ones about Aldus. And so I guess, yeah, at first, to do a bit of a deep dive into Erasmus, we probably should go, look at Erasmus's material and all the rest of it. But I want to find good material on Erasmus. See, the problem is, like Aldus has he hasn't been demonized by the critical text guys. It's like wherever the critical text has a bit of a debate over something, it's like they've set up their own scholars who sort of hover around that type of subject. And so anyone really wanting to do work on Erasmus, they have to go to, they'll end up going to Jan Kranz, or they'll end up going to these type of guys. And instead of just getting untainted material, just neutral sort of historical material, they get all these strange type of stories about how, there was a manuscript made to order that was in 1520 or something. It was made just for Erasmus, and all this sort of stuff. And people go, well, these are the world leading experts on this, let's follow them. And so they end up following these type of stories. Well, what I really want to do, because you have to sift through everything to do with Erasmus, like the whole concept that he never saw Vaticanus. It's just something that's made up. It's something that is not proven. But there was a very interesting book that came out the other day, and it's actually in the public domain, in a sense where it is copyrighted, but they have allowed people to grab it. Now I'll just quickly go there. It should be my downloads, so I'll quickly go to downloads. Okay, and I just so happened to download about 40 other things that day. But we'll see if we can find it. Details. Okay. Book draft, journals. But I might be able to. Yes, first go. That was just luck, because as you can see, I had that many PDFs downloaded that day, and I just so happened to grab this one, which is the one that I wanted. Oh, no, that's actually not it. That's the Chester Beatty Biblical Papyri at 90. Wrong one. So I know I've got it on the Textus Receptus Academy. So Dwayne is in the house. So I'll quickly jump to the TR Academy. So jump on Facebook, because I know I put a link to that download there. Textus Receptus Academy. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, here we are. Free ebook on Vaticanus for us to examine. So here we go. If you go to the Textus Receptus Academy and just scroll down a bit, I've got this linked. So you can download the whole book. It's all open. Okay. So from Erasmus to Maius, the history of Codex Vaticanus in New Testament textual scholarship. So this would be interesting to go through. But what I've noticed is they don't really talk about how Erasmus spent time in Rome. They sort of skip over that and only just talk about how Erasmus had correspondence with Bombasius and Sepulveda. But when you know that he lived with Bombasius, it's like, okay, it adds just color to the story. So we can go through this book as well. Open access. So the famous Codex Vaticanus, I'll make it nice and big so everyone can read along. I know most people just listen, but the famous Codex Vaticanus is currently regarded as one of the most essential sources for reconstructing the Greek New Testament text. Although it had already been used by textual critics in the 16th century, the manuscript only rose to the prominent status it now holds during the 19th century. In this volume, Yi, I guess you pronounce his name, writes an extensive scholarly history of Codex Vaticanus and describes its changing perceptions among scholars, beginning from Desiderius Erasmus until its editio princeps prepared by Angelus Maius. By examining critical editions, analyzing monographs and articles, considering book reviews and pamphlets, and delving into archive collections, Yi delineates the stages of the manuscript's progression from an ancient manuscript held at the Vatican Library to its designation as Codex Vaticanus, or the Codex Vaticanus. It is a study of the many individuals and their stories surrounding this very manuscript, stories about accessibility and dissemination of knowledge, authority, and head-on collisions between the most learned critics of the continuity and changing paradigms in scholarship. All in all, this book sets out how Codex Vaticanus became the manuscript par excellence in the history of New Testament textual scholarship. So that's an interesting book. That just came out July 22, 2024. So this guy's in the Netherlands. So this is what I'm discovering. And obviously it's not neutral. That's what I'm trying to say. This is written by people who are defending the critical text, defending their right and their jobs to reconstruct the New Testament. And so this is all part of the NA28 crew, the ECM crew. And look, I'm fine with people having a job and earning money and studying manuscripts, and that's all fine. But what I do find is that some of these scholars are not neutral. Jan Krantz is definitely not neutral when it comes to what he thinks about Erasmus. But these guys have set themselves up as the go-to guys for these issues, so that they cover all the bases. They go around covering all these bases. So what we're really doing is we're trying to deconstruct the fog that's around Erasmus. We're going to familiarize ourselves with everyone around him, his influences, what he has really said over the years. So then when someone comes along and says, 1 John 5:7, blah, 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 it's like even just myself reading through what Erasmus said and why he put 1 John 5:7 in there, it's pretty clear why he did that from Erasmus's own words. But then usually what you get is a scholar's spin on that Erasmus put it in because he was afraid he was going to die. And it's like, no, I'm not seeing that at all, and but this has just become like an official line, so but yeah, this will be an interesting thing. So I'll just quickly download this book again, even though I've downloaded it before, and that way I can just access that. Okay, so I think it's already downloaded. That was very quick. No, not yet. I mean, 124.95 euros. Okay, that seems quite expensive. And I think it was Dwayne Green was saying the other day, it would be good if a lot of these books, once they get past their sort of use by date and people aren't buying them anymore, and they're $400 on Brill, they should just release them into the public domain, or even if they just put them on Amazon and said they're $10, that at least they'd make a bit of money from it. Where it's like they just become stagnant. But then again, I guess they probably still do make money off it, because if you want to have a premier, library that's got all the issues on text criticism, you're going to go and spend, $500 on these books. And so a lot of the time they're getting funding for this. And so I guess, $500, but like this one here is open access. So here we go. So here is the book. Okay, so I've got a grid up there because I was doing editing. So I'll just hide that grid. And so even looking at who some of these guys are, okay, so you got David Parker. He's involved with that. Okay, so it is copyrighted. But we are just critiquing it, and they have made it open access, so it's sort of like anyone can do what I just did, and look at these exact pages. So I don't think that these guys would be that upset if I'm going through it. They probably want people to go through it. And if I'm reading through this and like it's open access, maybe what I should do is contact maybe Jan Kranz and just say, look, I'm critiquing that book. Is that okay? But I'm not really sure about copyright law. I think you can actually critique a book like this. But definitely you can critique videos. So I'm not sure if this link is too big, Dwayne. Might be way too big. But yeah, if you copy that and paste it, I won't show it because you'll be there forever typing in numbers. And but yeah, so that's the latest sort of thing that's come out. Jan Kranz put it on his site and said, look, it's free open access. And I guess the thing is too, they want more and more people to know about it. So I'm actually promoting, this book. And but yeah, so if we look up Erasmus, no doubt they've written about Erasmus, or he's on every page, I guess. But yeah, it'll be interesting to go through this and to look at who is involved with this type of thing. Maybe we can look up Aldas and see if he's mentioned there. You would think someone like Aldus Manutius, that perhaps he looked at Vaticanus. I mean, he was going to do his own Bible, but perhaps there's nothing written about that. But he's not that far from Rome. Anyway, so that's another thing that we can look at and go through, which is a recent thing. That would be interesting. But yeah, definitely this video, After Hours with Aldus Manutius, just going through and making ourselves familiar with what's being said here so that we're not taken off guard when we go through and look at some of the deep material that we want to look at. Renaissance Discoveries, so I must have watched. Yeah, this guy, I subscribe to him. I'm pretty sure I'm subscribed. No, I'm not. I should really subscribe to him. And yeah, like you can see the red where I've watched some of his videos, and Renaissance Discoveries, the Bible. So he writes or he does a whole episode on Aldus, and it's very interesting. It's mostly just him talking. But I kind of like these scholars that have 20 books all stacked up in a corner. You can tell that they're actually thinking and reading, and when everything's all pristine and neat and clean, it's like, well, I wonder how much work they're actually doing. Now, I'm going to jump into my hard drive, and I'm going to type in the word Erasmus. There's so much like say, for example, I just want to show you this one example. Now I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of these books. The Correspondence of Erasmus, okay? So let's make this nice and big. Oops, a bit too big. So let's just go down. So some of the correspondence from Martin Davids, and it's been translated into English. Master Erasmus, my beloved teacher, on the 9th of December, I received your letter written from Basel on the morrow of St. Thomas the Apostle to send you a brief answer by way of acknowledgement in the first place as regard to the money, So, yeah, just letters that they found in Erasmus's material. You know, sometimes people donate their whole entire library to a certain university or institution. And someone like Erasmus, he would have had so many books and rare things and notes. And so, yeah, these books are going through all that type of material. So this is the paraphrase that he has. So this is Paraphrasis in Mattheum. So this is in 1522. And as I said, the 1521 of John, had the Comma Johanneum in it, which is interesting because that's before his third edition. Little bits, tidbits of information like that are very interesting to know. So yeah, so we've got all these books that we can look at, think about, and I guess I've really got to know how much I can show, because I would like to go through a lot of this material and just, spend time reading through it, thinking about it, trying to work out exactly, what's being spoken about. But one of the main things that I really want to look at, now I'm just going to get my page back up here. Okay, I'll just shut down a few of these pages because I don't need them anymore. I do need that one. Okay, so here we are, my original page. So we have on my website, I've got a portal and it goes to books. Now, I've got the editions of the Textus Receptus all lined up so you can look at them. I haven't got the 1633. It's probably available somewhere. It might even be in this list. No, it's not. But the Scrivener edition. But what we really want to look at, the 1598 seems to be the one that backs up the King James Bible 99.9999% of the time. And so I've got it open here. So this is one of the documents that I really want to go through, and I want to look up every word. Now, one thing that's amazing, this is really cool. Now, I'm just going to have to disconnect my internet from my phone for a second, so it'll rectify itself, but I might disappear. So okay, so that's exactly what happened. And I've just got to shut off some things on my computer to make my internet a little bit faster. Get rid of Adobe. I'm back. There is I guess it's not an app. It's just you just download Google, okay? Maybe I can make this nice and big. So just on my phone, just download Google. Now, if you press the one on this side here, the furthest one, it goes to Google Lens, okay? So Google Lens there, and it has a little thing like a little camera. Now, if I look at this document of Beza, let's make that a little bit smaller. Okay. It's about as small as I can get it in a picture. Maybe full screen will help. And I'll go back to this view so my head's not so big. Makes me look humble. Now, if I grab all that in a picture, I'll take the snap. Okay, so you can see here what I've done. I've taken a snap of it, and it's highlighted everything. Okay, so then what I do is I go on that app, you go down to translate, and I'm translating it detects the language, and it says it's from Latin into English. So then I click translate. It's a Google Translate, and it translates this as, I'll make it nice and big again. Seems most of it's up the top here. So it's Yesu, our Lord, the new weaving, the end of the new weaving. So that's interesting. Now, I might have to just double check that. Ah, yes, okay. So it's actually translated it on the go in English. So I'll just show you this. So where it has Domini Nostri, it has our domains. Okay, so you got to recognize too that this is Google Translate, so it's probably not going to be 100%. But it has our domains, so the new weaving, so that should be New Testament. So, but that can show you. So when you can do this with any language, if you're in a restaurant and it's all in Chinese, you can read it in real time through that. And this has been available for like 6 or 7 years. And so, you can, if you just walk up to any foreign language, it'll translate it as much as Google Translate can do. So obviously the New Testament is like the new weaving, but sometimes these typos or misspellings or misdefinitions in Google can actually show you how the word, the etymology of the word and how the word is used, like the new weaving. Okay, so why would it translate testamentum as weaving? It's got something to do with weaving. What is, obviously weaving's like you're making like clothing sort of thing. The new weaving, it's just very interesting. The end of the new weaving. So that looks like Sive Novum Feodus. So, apart from just looking at this here, obviously you look up all these words. And it says, to whose Greek context the interpretations of two, the first old, the other of Theodore Beza. Okay, so obviously it's got the Vetus Altera, it's got the old Latin, and then it's got Beza. So it's basically describing how he's got it set out, that Beza has his Greek, then he has his own Latin translation, and then he has the Vulgate, so you can compare it. Some of these words are not translated that well; they're a bit fuzzy. The interpretation is rendered word by word. Maybe what I should do is I'll take a snapshot of that, and I will send it to myself in Messenger. And that way we can all look at what I'm looking at. Send. Okay, so let's go to Facebook.
and whole. Whoops. Excuse me. I shouldn't be doing a study with lots of people watching and just burp like that. But that's what you get when you do streams for already 2 hours. Maybe I should have a sip of my fizzy drink. I've been getting these ones lately, which are kombuchas. And so they got no sugar in them. They're all natural, 100% natural. They're sort of like a fermented kombucha with like 9 calories. So it's like, we tested this and it's like 60% on one of the strict, health food ones, and because Red Bulls and things like that, and they're filled with sugar, and so these ones are sort of, they have a natural type of sugar in it. Okay, so save that, save image as. Let's save that, and let's go to here, open it up. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at on my phone. So it's quite amazing. It does this in real time. So you're like here, it just says Evidisum, TH, Beza, annotations. It says, in which the interpretation is rendered word by word, is added the synopsis of the doctrine in the Evangelical Historia. Interesting. The Epiphtolus, I'm not sure what that is, or the epistles, I guess. Apophytolysis, comprehensor, so comprehended. I guess it's the old Latin type that he can't pick up. And also the context, which is explained in the commentary of the fiber. Also now, finally, the victim used by hand, which has been most accurately corrected so that in a certain way it can be seen as a new work. So it's interesting, how it's been translated there. But yeah, I would encourage anyone to get Google Lens. Now, one thing that I've discovered is if you go to any other language, French, German, even Urdu language, it's usually really, really good. But if you go to Latin is just one of those strange languages that I think because it was used for 2,000 years and sort of became an academic language. Like sometimes it can give you some the new weaving. That's different. Okay, so I'm just sort of having a bit of fun with that. But what we want to do is we want to go through this material of Beza. So I'm just sort of showing you some of the things. I think it just might be a front cover. Okay. But we want to go through and look at everything. Yeah, it's just a front cover. Everything Beza said and why he said it. So even going through his preface in Latin. Now, I won't torture you with going through it that type of way, but there are other means and ways to sort of get these things translated. But to go through and just see what he's talking about and what his influences are and why he's mentioning certain things is, these guys have dedications many times to Queen Elizabeth, and you'll read through his introduction and it's very similar to what the King James guys have said, or to what Erasmus might have said. And so even just sometimes looking at some of the names, look, he's talking about Calvin here. He talks about Johannes Calvini. Sometimes even just knowing who these people were surrounded by can really help in understanding. So
just as much as we want to go through and examine, the 1611 King James, and say Bryan Ross is going through that type of thing, and he's doing long programs, usually an hour, but long programs with lots of pictures and things like that, and sometimes going into obscure little details. But if you do go through that, after a while, the big picture forms, and you're like, yeah, I understand about the issues of printing. I understand about, why he's got these concerns about the verbatim identicality and, these concepts. And so I guess he's doing that, and we want to do that as well. We're looking at the King James. We're looking at, I'm basically doing debates saying the King James doesn't have error in it. But we want to go to sources, and we want to look at Beza and what he says. Now he's talking about Syria, so he's talking about Syria Interpretatione Coleto. So this would be, I guess, what Tremellius had worked on, but we're looking at Tremellius had passed away by this time. He's been dead for like 20 years, and so, but yeah, there's just looking, and it's not even so much just like looking at this material. I mean, it would be great to have this faithfully translated into English so we can really look at it. Look, he's got Piscator, because one thing is with Piscator, he was, I think it was Wettstein said that the Revelation 16:5 material that Beza used came from Piscator. Now, Piscator did a 1613 Greek edition with annotations and things like that. And it's in there. He adopts the reading of Beza of Esomenos shall be. But it was mentioned that he was the one who came up with the whole concept of Esomenos there. And so that's been of interest to me. And just to see his name here, it's okay, well, he obviously either has worked with Beza or he's been influential on him, or so. And some of these guys, Piscator, people are like, who's that? But we want to get to the stage where these people we know them on a first name basis. I say Piscator, people are like, yes, I know. They're just as much as we know Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza. It's not that hard to learn these names. We want to go through and know who Valla is. We want to examine these guys and get the best scholarship on this, and become familiar. So yeah, he has a dedication to Elizabeth here. That's quite interesting. And then he's got like I think it's a dictionary in front, like maybe a mild like concordance. So yeah, he's got in alphabetical order with the Latin and the Greek, because I guess they sort of do match up a bit with their alphabets. But he's got like in alphabetical order where you can find what's being spoken about. So say if we just grabbed Abyssus, you go to page 172.16a, and it's talking about that. So I guess that's a help. Nowadays we would just jump online and search for these type of things, Logos, or online on the internet, and you'll find it. But yeah, it's very interesting just to see what's being said there, even some Hebrew there. So I might it says show thumbnails. I'll just skip over that bit. So there's quite a lot of that. And then we get to the actual New Testament. And so the Matthew 1:1 thing, which a lot of you guys know I've studied quite a fair bit. But we want to go through his annotations and think about this type of material, which is a lot to go through. Now, his annotations Erasmus's annotations. This is stuff where this should be our playground. We should be jumping into this. So let's just open up Erasmus's annotations. And even then, like in Erasmus's front piece, he's got Origenis, Chrysostomy, so Origin, Chrysostom, Kyrilli, Cipriani. So he's got lots of early church writers mentioned here. Well, why is he mentioning them? Does that mean that he studied them as well? And so just knowing, like having that translated will help us know more about what Erasmus is talking about. And a lot of this material has been translated into English, and so it's just a matter of finding it there. And it would be really good to go through and see what Erasmus himself says about his own editions, because we're often hearing what James White says, Jan Kran says, and other scholars, and it's like, well, what about what Erasmus actually said? You know, so that would be a really good thing to go through. And like I was saying, the good thing is this is all available to us in this generation. I mean, back in those days, you had to go to a library, you had to have a lot of money to gain access to these books. They're just free on the internet. If you've got a bit of bandwidth, you can jump on and look at all this. So, and then we can look at his, like even just sometimes the headings can really help. Now, where's his annotations? Well, if you actually go, where are we? We'll go back. Content. And yeah, after here, that's when the commentary starts. Well, commentary, in a sense, this is his annotations. So it might start back here. No, it doesn't. That's Matthew. So he's talking about the Evangelium Secundum Mattheum, the Evangelion, and then he's talking in Latin what that is there. So that's talking about the heading of, you know, the book of Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew, and he's talking about that title there. So what we can see, even just by looking at this can help a lot of people. He's obviously speaking all this in Latin. He's going to the Greek, and he's also going to the Hebrew here, okay? So it's very important to know these type of things. That there's a lot of people, you're chatting with them in a debate, and they're like, well, I didn't even know that Erasmus knew Hebrew or something like that. And it's like, just by looking at his material, you can see that he's obviously going to Hebrew. How much he knew of it, you know, that's a whole nother thing, but obviously enough to do a whole, you know, commentary, annotation section. So he's talking about the names here, like Rahab here it's in the Hebrew. And so very, very interesting to go through all this material. And it would be good to go through this material in a sense where oftentimes we're dealing with controversial things, which I'm still going to do. This is only just one aspect of, you know, the Byzantine school. I might do one of these videos once a week or once every 2 weeks or whenever I can get a bit of time. But it would be good not to just be doing reactionary learning, you know, just only learning about, you know, 1 John 5:7, or only learning about, you know, 1 Timothy 3:16. That's all fine, but we want to learn just for the sake of knowing, and just for the sake of, we don't have to defend that verse, but it's good to know this about that verse. So that's one thing that I want to be doing, is going through these, I would call them source documents, even though most source documents are, you know, manuscripts, but these are obviously, they've used manuscripts and they've put them in printed form. We want to go through a lot of this material. what else did I want to go through? So we've got even like the Complutensian polyglot. That's a very interesting one to go through. And sometimes even just knowing how the format of this is set out, that they printed the New Testament 1514, but when you understand it's got like a Hebrew dictionary in there, they obviously were going to print it with the Old Testament as well. So this whole rush to print thing, there are a lot of gray areas when it comes to that. And so, but yeah, like here we have, this is very fascinating. The Hebrew, the Latin, and the Greek. And it looks like the Greek actually has the Latin above it, which is quite interesting because it's automatically like translated. So this is like a full interlinear Bible. This is mad. Like this is at the beginning of like printing Greek documents sort of thing, and they're already doing this type of thing. I think it's great. Yeah, like here we have like the Kurios here. So that looks like Dominus here. Looks like a D and an S sort of thing in the Latin. Monos, which means only, and Solos in the Latin. And so very interesting going through this. Okay, lots of Hebrew there. And so becoming familiar with who did the Complutensian polyglot. And there are lots of editions of the TR in that period. So another one that's a good, that would be very interesting to go through would be Walton's polyglot, but that would probably be later on. Now, what else was I going to show? So next time we'll go through Aldus Manutius's, we'll go through that video. We'll look at Aldus. We also want to look at people like Lorenzo Valla. Very important for this topic. And yeah, specifically with the donation of Constantine, how we proved that to be a forgery. And it had 1 John 5:7 in it, which is quite interesting. So yeah, even looking at the works that he did, I wonder what the article on Erasmus is like here. And so probably what I'll do is, because this is just sort of, I'm just nutting out a few things. I've had this on the back burner for quite a long time. What I'll do is I'll put out what I want to do. Like say not for this time, but say for next time, we're going to go through that video on Aldus. Okay. Now that's going to trigger a few thoughts. It's going to get us interested in Aldus and what he did. And maybe too, that can lead on to some other videos, some other understandings, some other books, and things like that. And so maybe I can do a little bit of homework as well. And that homework will be for myself to do, but also if anyone else wants to follow along and wants to, grow and learn this sort of stuff, I'm not going to make it, impossibly difficult. But even just like, okay, well, for starters, we really should be knowing, Greek. We should be knowing Latin. We want to start at the beginning and go through and learn a lot of this stuff. And as we're going along, we're going to be coming across certain Latin words. Now, we can fudge our way through some of this Latin. Jesus Christus, obviously, that's Jesus Christ, but these words around it, we really need to think about these. And as we go along and we just sort of study a certain section, we'll get better and better at it. looking at Hebrew, studying these type of things. And like, say, for example, that video on Aldus Manutius, even like the other day, I just went back through and watched that popular video, Luther. And I was like, what am I going to watch? I had a bit of time to sit down. I was feeling a little bit sick, actually. And so I thought, I watched that Luther film. That was really cool. So I watched it. And there was just so much more that I enjoyed watching. There was so much more that was coming to my mind than when I first originally watched it, like 20 years ago or whatever, when it first came out, maybe 25 years ago. Like, I enjoyed it, but there was lots that I didn't really understand. And I was sort of Googling things and jumping on Wikipedia, and it was a really good frame of mind to get into, because the Textus Receptus influenced Martin Luther hugely. And in the end, when he's got the New Testament and he's given it to who was the main guy in the university there, he gave it to that old guy. And it's like, yeah, that's sort of what we're doing, It was just all these connections. And I sort of, you can't forget that there is a lot of good, there are a lot of good films out there. Some of them might be a bit older and daggier, and every now and then they do one like Luther, and it's a bit more modern and it's easier to watch. But even just like people like Cajetan, the Catholic guy, who was constantly coming against Luther, just knowing like the history of him, like he would have known and corresponded with Erasmus, that makes it more interesting, So, and that scene where he's in that castle where he's sort of been kidnapped by his own people, but he ends up, doing a Bible translation, and he's like, I needed a proper New Testament, not this rubbish. I need a Greek grammar. I need this. I need that. He's demanding. He wants his books because that they all come from the university. Usually, he's got access to all this stuff, but he's like, I need this. I need that. And so, it was very interesting to go through that and just to think about it and how Luther translated the Bible. It was a monumentous task. But it's the history of the Textus Receptus, and so we want to become familiar, because Luther isn't detached from this period of time, and so we'll look into Luther, we'll look into his correspondence. Like, we mightn't get involved with all the controversy and everything like that of what they're talking about, but it's just the fact that these guys knew each other as scholars and respected each other as scholars. There's Luther's edition there. His New Testament. That's a 1530. Wow. I mean, this is just incredible. I'll just turn that sound off. Can get a bit annoying. So, that's Matthew 1. There we go. Very interesting. And specifically, I know I'm talking about the 1598 of Beza. Now, that's the ultimate end game. So if I was a critical text guy, that's like the CBGM, for me, like James White makes out, they're going to come out with a definitive finished text finally, sort of thing. And well, to me, that's like Beza. Well, ultimately, it's the King James translation, but Beza is like 99.99% of that. And so that's sort of like the end product of all this. So that there is a reason why we're learning this. We're learning this so we can understand Erasmus, understand his sources, understand his knowledge, understanding that people translated Erasmus's material, Luther. We can look at Tyndale. We can look at the influence of Erasmus over that whole generation. And then from there, I think once we've sort of covered that area, and we maybe go back like 100 years to, Valor and all that, we're looking at that era of the Byzantine school. Then we can sort of segue from there to around the time of the King James. Now, I know even Bryan Ross has done quite a lot of study into this. So, okay, so Dwayne is wanting to the StreamYard link. There you go. You can jump on there. So I'll just type in Bryan Ross. So here's Bryan Ross. Online messages, maybe it's there. Sermon series. School of Theology. Okay, so this is where all these videos are. Now I'll go to the 24th one. So it might be good to go through some of these videos as well. I know they go for like an hour, but I can probably deal with one of these each time. But just going through, he seems to be going through like concepts at first, but then he starts going back to like Erasmus, because I have listened from like, I think it was the time of Erasmus. I started going through that. I'll just see when it starts. Okay. Canonical models. He's done a lot of work here. Textual variants, corruption. I might just skip a few of those. Okay, so here we go. Talking about the two streams model. And then he starts off here. Wycliffe in the First Complete English Bible. So that would be interesting to go through from there, just going through some of this history. Because then eventually we end up in that era that I'm talking about. And what would be interesting too, to get ourselves in that. Hey, Dwayne, how you going?
Oh.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's
great.
1
second here. I think I'm getting some double sound in here. 1 second.
Yeah, so he's got lesson 100, Erasmus in the Greek New Testament, lots and lots, Fall of Constantinople. This would be great stuff to go through. And I guess, too, there's even old videos of Tyndale and, like Luther and Jan Hus and Wycliffe. And it'd be great to dig those up and watch them, just to get our the atmosphere of that, that early stage of the Reformation in our bones, sort of thing. But anyway, how you going, Dwayne? You living the dream?
There we go. How's it going? I sure am. Yeah, I forgot to turn some of the lights on and all that kind of good stuff. So, I'm going to move my stuff over here. There we go. And then I can look into the camera and look at the screen at the same time. It works out pretty good. All right. All right, we're good.
Yeah,
how's it going? Not too much. I just thought it would be a good evening to come and hang out with you for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got nothing completely in mind, but I don't know if you saw the last live stream there. I was talking about Mark 9, 44, and 48. 46, yeah. 44 and 46. Yeah, some really, really interesting stuff there. I was actually quite surprised.
Yeah, I was playing catch up on it, and when you started getting into some of the details, I fast forwarded a little bit, and because I wanted to get to the point where I was live with you, instead of being, half an hour behind the whole time. And I had it on double time. So that's why I missed some of what you were saying about, was it Theophylact? Phylact. Okay.
Yeah. So he's got a whole bunch of commentaries, right? And so he was, I don't really know much about him aside from the wiki article, right? So he was a leader in the church in the 1100s. So he died in the early 1100s, and he wrote this commentary of the New Testament. And so when we look at a number of the minuscule manuscripts, what we see is his commentary interspersed amongst some texts of the New Testament. So like in Bibles today, if you have a commentary, typically it's like the text at the top, and then at the bottom you have a little bit of the commentary, right? But they would put the commentary in line with the text. So you'd have a little bit of text here, and then commentary, and then more text, and then commentary. And they would just do that throughout the whole page. So I guess his commentary was quite popular. And there's a whole bunch of minuscule manuscripts that contain his commentary with the New Testament text like that. So with the variant in, I'm just pulling it up here on Logos. The variant, it's like where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched in Mark 9. So it repeats that after, he tells you to cut off your hand because, it's better for your part of you to go to hell than your whole body. And then what was the other one? It was cut off your hand. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it, really extreme, the hyperbole, right? And after each three of these statements, that phrase, where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched, in the Textus Receptus and basically the Byzantine tradition altogether, has that statement after each one of those. But in the critical text, it only has it after the third one in verse 48. So you go, well, where did the other two instances go? And so that's what I was looking at there, and kind of found like an interesting pattern of readings in these minuscule manuscripts that contain Theophylact's commentary. And in these specific manuscripts, the small grouping of manuscripts, they don't just omit 44 and 46, right, where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched, but it actually omits the verse in between them as well. And this typically, according to the ECM apparatus, only generally occurs with one outlier in Theophylact's commentary. So I was like, that's kind of interesting. So I was able to get in touch with someone, and they sent me a list of collations that were done on John chapter 18. And the collations, it was like a full collation. So every manuscript that you could find available, there was a correlation with all these manuscripts with a specific type of text coming out of Theophylact's commentaries. And so what I've kind of discovered is by cross-checking those manuscripts which don't have that middle verse 45, so they omit the three verses there, they what's the term? They are on the outliers of this Theophylact family group. So anyway, what I was getting at with that, a very long way of explaining it, is these references in the ECM that are quoted in there as having support for the removal of verse 44 and 46 really shouldn't be used at all, either for support for the removal or the support for its inclusion. In fact, I probably would lean more towards the support for the inclusion, because we know that Theophylact, of all the other manuscripts, which are many of them, generally speaking, contain verse 44 and 46. So it's interesting how you can see that specific error coming through that line of manuscript. So we know that it's a mistake based on that. And so it's really not a witness to the removal of those two passages. But of course, modern critical text is like, well, it's not in Aleph and B and C and a couple others, so we're just going to say it's not scripture, right? That's the essential argument for anyway. I thought it was kind of a cool discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking, because I know I've in the past put you on to Gavin McGrath, the guy in Australia who's doing a commentary on the Textus Receptus, and I'm just wondering. Oh no, he's only done to Mark 5. So
okay,
it'll probably come out in his next edition. But maybe that's the type of information that would be really helpful to him even.
Mm-hmm.
But he seems like the sort of guy who could come up with those conclusions. But yeah, that would be an interesting video to send him and say, hey, look at this. He would be studying that at the moment.
Yeah, like I'm still going through and checking all the manuscripts that have Theophylact's commentary in it, just to double check. But generally speaking, for the most part, they all contain it, except for these very few, which are outliers according to the Theophylact type. It's rather interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so so if anyone wants to jump on Dwayne Green's channel, it's his most recent video, and I noticed did you do a little short on that? I think I noticed you did a short.
Yeah, I was just kind of going over the where we are as far as being able to catalog and image and index and get all of the transcriptions done for all the manuscripts. It's very small. It's actually quite surprising. I think it's something like maybe 3 or 4% of all Greek manuscripts have been indexed and transcribed, and the rest is still this is lifetimes of work to get it all done. I was actually kind of shocked. I was sort of expecting that we would be a lot further along than where we are now. But I suspect with artificial intelligence and its ability to like read handwriting and stuff, it probably won't be too far off before AI is transcribing these manuscripts. Wouldn't surprise me. I estimated in the video, I put a guess of about 5 years. So within 5 years, I think we'll probably see AI cataloging all of them.
And so this is the video here. How far are we digitizing all the New Testament manuscripts? So I'll just get this up because you do have the...
Yeah, sure.
You do have the picture here of the statistics. Yeah. And so most of the papyri, the majuscules, you're looking at just over 20%. Minuscules, probably less than 5, maybe about 5%, like less
2.
than 5.
That's like 2, maybe.
Yeah. Lectionaries, hardly low. Anything.
Yeah.
And yeah, the total is it's pretty woeful.
It's very small. Right? Yeah. And I remember thinking, well, ECM is supposed to be like, what's the term? All encompassing. I was under the impression that was going to be almost all the manuscripts were going to be attached to this, but it's not even close. I mean, there's maybe a couple hundred at most.
Well, I was shocked. Yeah, I was shocked with ECM that just came out of Revelation. That because I know Hoskia, there was about 200 manuscripts that he had access to, and he actually was a guy who was instrumental in the creation of the International Monetary Fund. He was an international banker, and he was very wealthy, and he spent a fortune paying people to take photographs of manuscripts and sending him to him. So that's how he had access to so much stuff. And
that's interesting.
But the current ECM that just came out is only based on 100 manuscripts. And I was thinking, surely they've got like about 300 or maybe more, 350. Like, why is it only based on 100? Is that all they've got access to? Or it just, when I was doing a video on it, it actually came up in that. And I was a bit shocked. And then I know that TurretinFan, he was saying, I'm a bit disappointed that it's only based on 100 manuscripts. It should be based on everything,
Yeah. I wonder what Text and Textword, how much it has in its apparatus. I know that's supposed to be a lot more full, but I don't know. See, I don't speak German. That's the problem. Right? All that stuff comes out of Germany. It is interesting that it comes out of Germany. I just find that fascinating. But that's besides the point. But if you look at this chart, it gives you like an indication of where the priorities lie. As far as critical text or modern textual criticism, generally speaking, right? Because you see in the left side there that the papyrus manuscripts are almost completely done. There's, it's the total inverse of the minuscules. So, and obviously, right, because everybody seems to put more weight on the papyri and the earlier uncials. And it was in Frederick Wies's, I don't know if it's Wiese or Weiss. I was talking about that in my live stream, and nobody really knows for sure. I should reach out to him. How do you pronounce your last name? But he was lamenting in his introduction about how the minuscule manuscripts have been completely neglected. And this was, thanks to the work of Westcott and Hort, who basically put textual criticism behind 150 years. Now I know you're a King James guy, so you're probably not as upset about that per se, but it really did set textual criticism backwards for a while. And even now we're just starting to see some Byzantine readings come back in, but we still have a tremendous amount of weight on Aleph and B. And as I'm going through, so part of the series that I've started is to go through those 16 verses, which are in the King James version, but not in our modern English Bibles, and kind of offer like a commentary on them. And as I'm looking at those, it's becoming very apparent that if you take Aleph and B out, and I mean, to all fairness, sure, it's part of the history of the text, but if you take Aleph and B out, it will change the decision, almost guaranteed, on all of the ones I've looked at so far. So it's not an Aleph and B, right?
Yeah.
Now, and it's surprising, right? As much as modern textual criticism today says, well, it's not all about Aleph and B. They really do sway a lot of opinions with Aleph and B. And when you go through Metzger's commentary, for example, he'll say stuff like, well, it's not in the oldest and best manuscripts. It's not in our best uncials, Aleph and B, and then a couple others. And then it's like he's got to justify that. And so how he justifies it is he pulls something out of thin air, and he'll say something like, well, the scribe borrowed this phrase from verse 48. And I mean, that's good that you said that he borrowed that from verse 48, but what evidence do we have of that? You go, well, because it's not in Aleph and B. Well, we're circular reasoning. It's not in Aleph and B because the scribe, he borrowed it from verse 48, and he borrowed it from 48 because it's not in Aleph and B. So, he doesn't. It's frustrating because you would think that he would offer some sort of reasoning why he thinks it comes from verse 48, and I'm thinking of 9, 46, and 44. But there's no real indication that that's the case. So. Yeah, I'm rambling now, but
I know that it's all good. And I think what you're saying about Metzger, we can see that in Bart Ehrman, where he's not afraid just to make up a bit of a story and just stick with that as the official. And as long as he can get a bunch of people in the academy to sort of agree with that type of position, or it's been popularized, well, he just says, well, the consensus of scholars is that, Peter was illiterate, or, they just make up these type of things. And I think that really does come from Metzger and his school, which there's just so much made up by these guys that it's quite it's a shame.
It's interesting if you look at the New English translation. So I don't particularly like the translation, but I think the notes can sometimes be helpful, but it's obviously a critical text bent. But when you look at the notes on some of these verses, in fact, most of the verses I've looked at out of these, I think I've done like 3 or 4 of the 16 that were missing. It's almost verbatim the same wording and phrasing as it is in Metzger. It's literally the parrot problem, but in the NET notes. Pull it up. Mark 9:44. Right at the end, there's footnote 68. Probably just click on it, it'll be easier. Yeah, right there.
I'm in Mark 10.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh,
Wrong horse. We're backing the wrong horse in that race.
that's right.
68. Here we go. Just trying to navigate. I don't use the net that much.
Oh, you're back in chapter 10.
Oh, I don't know why it's jumped there. Maybe I've just clicked on that little thing. That is strange. Yeah, that's like a navigational issue because I didn't know that I'd done that. Or maybe I didn't press enter. That was the thing.
Oh, Acts. There you go. Mark 9. Oh, it skipped over again. It went back to 10. Oh, that's so weird.
That is strange. Yeah, I can't figure that one out.
Reload the page and then...
Maybe I'll just scroll down rather than clicking anything.
There you go.
Okay.
There it is. Note 56. Yeah, I think the one for 46 would just point you back to this note. But
Okay.
if you read it, most later manuscripts have 944 here and 946 after 45, where their worm never dies and their fire is not quenched. Identical with verse 48. So Metzger points out verse 48. And then verse 44 and 46 are presented in Aleph, D, Theta, F13, majority, Latin, Syriac, the Peshitta, and the Herclean, but lacking in significant Alexandrian manuscripts and several others. So he writes that down, basically verbatim, with a few other witnesses that aren't in Metzger, and says this appears to be a scribal addition from verse 48, and almost certainly not original part of the Greek text of Mark. That's like verbatim. That's the verbatim conclusion from Metzger. If you go to archive.org and pull up Metzger's commentary and take a look at that, it's just wild. It's just wild how like plagiarized that is. I'm not accusing them of plagiarizing, but really it's the parrot problem that James Snap goes on about for Mark 16, 9-20, right? That there's no real new research or anything. It's just kind of like parroting the same argument. It's a scribal addition. It's a scribal addition. Well, where did the scribal addition come into? Why did the scribe add that? There's a serious lack of ability to explain that very question. It's like if it wasn't in there to begin with, how do you explain the fact that it got in there? It's much easier to explain from the position of it being in there to explain how it disappeared from there, right? And it's very clear there's some sort of parablepsis going on, right? Because the verses are exactly the same. You fill an entire line with the exact same letters. Very easy for somebody to skip over that and mix and miss everything in between, especially if it's in a commentary like we see in Theophylact's commentary. So, yeah, I'm not entirely happy with these notes that I've been seeing in Metzger. They just don't provide enough details.
Yeah.
You can't really interact with it either because he just doesn't provide anything. The only thing you're interacting with is, well, it's not an Aleph and B.
Well, one thing I discovered, I was going through, I discovered this a few years ago with James White's King James Version only book, is he actually copies pretty much verbatim Edward Hill's. So say on the issue of Luke 2:22, we have her purification or their purification. So this is James White's book, and this is Edward Hill's. So White has their purification, and I've put the italics there. This is exactly how White has it, and that's what Hills has, their purification. He has Erasmus Stephanus, and he has Erasmus Stephanus. White has M, where Hills has majority of the Greek manuscripts, sort of the same thing. Yeah. Then he has her purification Beza, and then it has her purification Beza. White has KJV Complutensian, and then it has King James, but then he adds Elzevir, so that's the only difference is the Elzevir's there, and he has Complutensian 76, and a few Greek minuscules, and it has a few other Greek minuscule manuscripts. Then it has Latin Vulgate, and James White's got Vulgate here. So it's absolutely in the same order. It's pretty much like plagiarism. Like I wouldn't make it a big deal, but it's quite interesting that James White just seems to have gone copy paste with Edward Hill's material on this verse. And I know Edward Hill's like this is written quite a long time ago. His original book was in 1956, and obviously he updated a few things as he went along. But it just seems strange that in James White's 2009, he's still just sort of basically parroting something from quite a long time ago. And so, but I thought that was interesting because we were just talking about how people just seem to go Metzger and they just copy and paste his material and add a bit of fluff around it. It seems like that's.
I think we're like at a place now where people are expressing these arguments, especially on social media, right? Like you see some of these arguments against like the long ending of Mark, for example, and stuff, and people don't realize the actual source of that argument, which usually goes back to someone like Metzger. And it's not that these people have actually gone in and looked at the manuscripts and are making conclusions based on what they're seeing. Because I think that if people were to do that and look at the evidence themselves, they would probably come to a different conclusion on Mark 16, 9 through 20. And for the most part, I think people are maybe parroting is a strong word. Parroting, I would use that for those who are more academic and understand the issues. When you get somebody who doesn't really know about textual criticism, right, they're just going to listen to whatever, their favorite Bible teacher is going to tell them, right? Like realistically, we can't all study every single little thing that's out there. And so we got to take someone at their word. So you don't necessarily fault them so much for it, but those who should know better, right? So when we start talking about textual criticism and those who know, that's a different story altogether. If they're parroting arguments, then that's, you shouldn't stop it. Why don't you admit Mark 69 through 20 scripture? It really is like, I don't know. The external evidence is so clear. Irenaeus, last time I talked to you, I showed you the geographic argument, right over the north of the Mediterranean. We have the long ending of Mark, and through the south, we don't. And they kind of mix at the east side. No, it's not east. There you go. East. There we go. And that's where you start seeing all the confusion. But like not everybody's going to research it and they're going to take their favorite teacher's word for it. But those who can research and do, I think they would legitimately come to the conclusion that Mark 16, 9 through 20 scripture.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that as well, like with like people like Stephen Boyce, who's obviously looking into this, and he's come more to a Byzantine priority sort of position on that. We can look even at what's his name, Matthew Everhard. And so he was like, I'm critical text. And then when he was challenged on these issues of the Pericope Adulterae and the last 12 verses of Mark, he realized, hang on, I'm not critical text, I'm more majority text, because he did look into them. I haven't watched all of Mike Winger's material on that. I just saw that James Snap had talked about it, and so I jumped on and watched a little bit. But I'm not sure if he has the type of credentials that you really need to understand the whole issue of the primacy of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus over everything there. But yeah, so I guess, like you're saying, people who sort of know better, the academics, that they know they're not just parroting stuff; they're studying this stuff out, and they're actually coming to the conclusion that there's really not much weight on the critical text side with those issues.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about Mike Winger. I think overall he did a relatively good job for somebody who's not steeped into that conversation. But it was interesting because the discussion he had about Eusebius and Marinus. So in the work entitled Ad Marinus, where this figure Marinus, he was asking questions of Eusebius. How do you fix this contradiction, and what do you do with that contradiction? And one of the contradictions had to do with I think it was the timing of Mary running to the tomb in the end of Mark 16. And so Eusebius's response to him was, well, there are some people who suppose that this isn't scripture, and so they would just do away with it altogether. So that was just his one answer, right? He had another answer which involved how to punctuate it in a way which made it work out. But anyway, so what happens is someone comes along and they see Eusebius, and they go, oh, see, Eusebius is saying that Mark 16, 9 through 20 isn't scripture. No. We got to slow down, because what Eusebius is doing, he's playing the part of somebody who might say that so as to provide some sort of response to Marinus. And then all the while we're misinterpreting Eusebius's phrase there, we're also missing the fact that Marinus is a witness to the long ending of Mark, because he's having trouble with it. And he's like, how do I reconcile the long ending of Mark this. And if we were to presuppose, like the modern textual critics do, and try to put a motive on a scribe who's copying it, well, then we could turn around and say, well, maybe the scribe didn't put it in because he had trouble with this contradiction, and so he left it out, and that's why we don't have a longening mark. So I typically don't like to use those arguments because, you know, they're really subjective, and you could just really pull anything out of midair to support that. But we can play the same game too. But yeah, so Mike Winger, when he talked about Eusebius, he missed that whole bit. I think he mentioned very briefly about the conversation between Eusebius and Marinus, but I think he misunderstood it as well. Yeah, and Jerome, right? Jerome is quoted as saying, "Well, Mark 16:9-20, it's not part of Scripture, and so blah blah blah." But it turns out that Jerome was actually quoting Eusebius when he's answering Marinus.
Right. Okay.
A lot of people miss that. So Jerome, you know, because that wouldn't make this is the only way to make sense of Jerome, because, like you say, well, if Jerome didn't believe Mark 16:9-20 was Scripture, why did he put it in the Vulgate? Well, that's the answer, is because Jerome believed it was Scripture, and he was just quoting Eusebius for whatever purpose he was using it for. Yeah,
it's very interesting. Yeah, and so usually I'm not. When I debated Stephen Boyce, I had to jump into the Pericope Adulterae issue, and I was just parroting James Snap and Maurice Robinson. I just sort of cranked a whole bunch of information from those guys, and because really the whole debate should have been on Revelation 16:5. That's really what we both wanted to debate, but I think they just threw in because Stephen Boyce had done a paper on the woman caught in adultery. He wanted to squeeze that in too, so it made for an awkward debate where you're sort of trying to focus on one thing, and then you have to gear shift and talk about the Pericope Adulterae, and then gear shift and talk about Revelation 16:5. And so there were a lot of things that just got unsaid. But most of the time I haven't really concerned myself with large chunks of deleted text like that, especially with these two issues of the 12 verses, because it's sort of like to me, when I look into the last 12 verses of Mark, I'm like, you'd have to have such a bias against that reading to go with the critical text there, that it's almost like just an absolute slam dunk. Like even Jeff Riddle, when he debated James White, they were doing like a really obscure Textus Receptus reading, not based on the majority text 1 minute on Ephesians 3:9, and then going with the last 12 verses of Mark, because Jeff Riddle knew that if James White would debate that, he would look like a fool because it's so easily defended. And it's one of those things where I sort of think, well, other people have done a lot of research into that and defended that. So I've never really jumped into that arena and talked about that much. Usually I'm trying to look at the tiny little minutiae, the jots and tittles of, differences between the majority text and the TR. But not saying that there isn't a need for all that, but it's just there's usually so many other people doing that, so I don't usually. But I have debated on it with Stephen Boyce, but I just sort of grabbed everyone else's material and just sort of was parroting that and just saying, just go to read James Snap's book on it. It's good, and that's what I was saying.
It is good. Yeah. No, it's good. It's been interesting, just in going through these couple of verses here. Like one that was a little bit eye-opening for me was these kinds don't go out by prayer and fasting. What verse was that? Matthew, I forget which one it was. What verse?
17:21, is it?
That sounds about right. And there's a similar verse, I believe it was in Mark, where it talks about casting out demons. And this comes down to the whole question of, the claim that textual variants, they don't impact doctrine, they don't affect this, that, and I think that's true most of the time, but it's not true all the time, right? And this is one of those examples. So if you take a look at the passage in question. It says, "This kind doesn't come out except through prayer and fasting." That whole verse is taken out in Matthew. And there's one other verse in Mark which said, "This kind doesn't come out except through prayer and fasting." But in Mark, "and fasting" is questioned. So in both of these passages, in Matthew and Mark, the whole bit about fasting is not considered scripture by the modern text critical method. So this leaves us in a position now where, when we're talking about demonic possession and how to deliver people from demonic possession, the critical text doesn't have fasting at all. Like, it just, I mean, it's relegated to the footnotes, sure, and I'm sure somebody would read the footnotes. But the point is they're putting doubt on whether or not this bit about fasting should be in there, about casting out demons. Now, this could be motivated by a number of things, right? Maybe they're cessationists. They don't believe casting out of demons is for today. If you don't believe that, I'd be curious as to what makes you think demonic forces stopped at the end of the 1st century, right? I'm sure they keep going. There's a need for deliverance today. But yeah, so it's just wild to me that both instances are neutered, for lack of a better word, taken out. No fasting. It's not mentioned at all in the critical text. So what do we make of that? What do we make of that? It's a change in doctrine. It's a change in teaching. If you're going to teach about deliverance, you just skip over the fasting bit. So there's a certain, like, and I don't like to pull the conspiracy card out a lot, right? That's just not typically how I run. But when you look at this and you think of like a demon, and where does the demon want to be? He wants to be inside of his host. And if I was a demon, right, I would want to make it as difficult as possible for somebody to cast me out. So how do we do that? Well, let's take away one of their weapons. Let's take away fasting. Let's take it out. So anyway, I'm generally not conspiratorially like that, but it's very difficult to not see a tampering there, an unhealthy tampering. So yeah, that's just the question of whether or not doctrines and teachings are impacted by textual variants. I think they are, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got this really old school book called Serious Omissions in the NIV Bible. So this is by Keith Piper. I think it says his name there. Yeah, Keith Piper.
Okay.
So he's an Australian guy. He's an independent fundamental Baptist. And I think I've had this book since like maybe the 90s. But he does have some strange things in here about, Bible translators losing their voice and, this type of weird thing. And it's but he has an interesting thing here. I might actually even hold it up to the screen. He has a section here where the NIV omits fasting 5 times and weakens our prayer life 3 times. So it's quite interesting. So he's got the verse we're talking about, "This kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting." Then it has, "This kind comes can come out only by prayer," and it omits "and fasting." And then it has 2 Corinthians 6:5, "in hunger," where in the KJV it had "in fastings." Yeah, so that's an interesting omission. Or change, I should say. In 1 Corinthians 7:5, it has "give yourselves to fasting and prayer," but in the NIV, it has "devote yourselves to omit and prayer." Acts 10:30 says, 4 days ago I was fasting and prayed," but the NIV says 4 days ago I was omit praying. Luke 21:36 has "pray always that." And then it has pray and then omit that. So these are just other things rather than fasting. In prayer and supplication, it just says "in prayer." In effectual prayer is the prayer. So it sort of weakens prayer there. So there is quite a lot of difference between the NIV there and the KJV. I'm not sure what the other Bibles say, but I've often challenged people to do a study on fasting and not just look up the word fasting, but look up the word hunger and maybe like a thesaurus type of thing about that subject. And there's quite a lot
changed. And I think, like you're saying, if we were to put our tinfoil hat on and go, okay, is there a conspiracy against the doctrine? Well, this does seem like there is a bit of a like some people are saying don't pray and fast. And I know just myself, because I'm not a cessationist, and I listen to all sorts of different preachers and teachers, and so sometimes I'll be listening to people who are talking about casting out demons or healing and things like that, and they'll mention prayer and fasting, but then say, well, but we don't really have to do that because the oldest and best manuscripts say that those words aren't original. So they just downplay that whole thing. So oftentimes they omit that entire doctrine because of the influence of modern Bibles. And so to me, that is a doctrinal change. It mightn't be as important to someone sitting in an academic chair working for some company who doesn't really go out and pray for people or go through hospitals and minister to the sick and things like that. But the people who are actually doing that type of thing, we see firsthand that this does affect doctrine. It affects practice and Bible teaching.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So you might get someone who say, okay, well, you know what, but that's not really an important doctrine. Maybe that's, you don't have to believe in fasting for demon possession in order to be saved. Okay, and I believe, okay, that's fine, that's true. But okay, you got to go back to Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, right? When he talks about jots and tittles, he says, what is it? I've not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And that there will not be one jot or tittle that will no wise pass from the law till all is fulfilled. And then he goes on to say that if you take the least of these commandments and basically paraphrasing, don't do them, but teach men to do so, you'll be least in the kingdom of heaven. But if you do the least and do them, teach the least and do them, you'll be the greatest. So, I mean, I'm in the position where I don't think that's specifically talking about the individual words per se. I don't think it's talking about preservation there. But what it is talking about is it's talking about the very least consideration of the law, the smallest commandment, the smallest thing in the law, the smallest thing is going to be fulfilled by Christ. And so you're getting this, and not only that, but you're commanded to fulfill all this, the smallest thing in the law. So if we kind of port that over to New Testament teaching, who then are we to say that this teaching is really small and not important? And this teaching is. So when we come back to, and this is what makes this specific variant probably one of the most egregious variants in my mind, because it's teamed up with two other passages. It may be small and it may not be necessary for salvation, right? That's true. I think we would both believe that. But man, if you have somebody who is manifesting a demon and they come to you for help, right? All of a sudden, that one little teaching about fasting is going to be one of the most important things for you in that moment. So I don't think we can just fluff it off and say, well, it's not really that important. Maybe it's not that important for 98% of your Christian walk, but that 2% might come up and you're going to need that. You're going to need that. So so I think we could take Matthew 5, 18, 19 and apply it that way. Because there is a specific teaching and a specific doctrine I would see as impacted by a textual variant there. That doesn't mean we don't know. We can know, and we know that those passages contain the word and fasting. So it's not a question of, oh, there's some uncertainty here. I don't think there is any uncertainty there. I'm pretty sure that fasting is part of scriptures.
Yeah, and so speaking of the demonic, it's interesting. I'm in the middle of a study on the demoniacs. Okay. Matthew 8:28, it talks about two men who were possessed. Mark 5:2 speaks of one man, so a man was possessed, and in Luke it talks about a certain man. So my understanding is that these are actually two separate stories, and someone like Jesus who was going around, and when you understand and you're focusing in on him casting out devils, because a third of his ministry was casting out devils, a third of his ministry was healing. And so oftentimes if people are uninterested in these topics, they don't really find any type of fascination with that. It's just an
academic type of thing that they're looking at, going, okay, Jesus did this and that. But when you think that you can actually pray for someone and they can get delivered from a demon, or you can pray for someone and they can get healed, you start to focus in on all the little nitty gritty things that happen. And so there was one time when Jesus was preaching, and so many people were coming and touching him, like the woman with the issue of blood type of thing. So many people were touching him that the disciples were worried, because they were thronging him, it says. It's like a swarm of bees were around him, sort of thing. Everyone's touching him, and everyone who touched him got healed. So can you imagine a huge multitude of, say, 10,000 people? Everyone's coming and touching Jesus. So they actually put him in a boat so that he could, they could calm everyone down, and then he could do preaching. So when you look at that just that one instance can throw away all the TV preaching sort of thing, that you need to get rid of your inherited curses, and you need to renounce this. Like the biggest sinner in Jerusalem could have just walked up and slapped him, and he got instantly healed. It says they all got healed. And so it's quite an interesting thing. And so when you're looking at these demoniacs, my understanding is that there's two different occasions where this happened. Now it seems like the pig farming industry was on the other side of the river, and it seemed like people who were possessed with demons tended to stay on that side of the region. And so when you're actually going around, say like myself, I've been to many different countries. We would go through like local markets and just pray for absolutely everyone, like 300 or 400 people. We'd go to the hospitals, they're like in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, and we'd pray for everyone in the hospital. We'd go into rooms where there's like 60 people, and they're all sick, and we're just praying for every single one of them. And so I've got no doubt that Jesus, he was doing that type of thing. And so he would have been casting out demons one day, and the next day a very similar scenario would have happened, and he's cast out another demon. Then the next day something's happened, he's cast out another one. And this would have just been something that he was constantly doing. So oftentimes people say that this is one story, but they've got a few of the details wrong. Sometimes they're saying 2 men, sometimes 1 man. But when you look at the locations here, Matthew is talking about the Gergesenes. Mark is talking about the Gadarenes. And so
I think that the one in Mark, I think there's a textual variant there, right?
Well, it's
whether it's the Gergesenes or if it's the Gadarenes.
So the first one in Matthew, it has the Gergesenes, but then in the critical text, it's the Gadarenes.
That's right.
Then in Mark, you've got the Gadarenes in the King James, and in the critical text, it's the Gergesenes. Then in Luke, you've got the Gadarenes, and then in the critical text, it's the Gergesenes. So none of them match up. They're just all over the place. And so in the King James, you got the first one is the Gergesenes, and the second 2 are the Gadarenes. But in the critical text, the first one is the Gadarenes, and the second 2 are the Gergesenes. So it's like flipped on its head. And this has to do with someone getting a demon cast out of them. It's quite a big thing. It's a big story. You were trying to get doctrine from this. The first thing you're confronted with is all this confusion of everything being back to front. And so I thought that was an interesting thing, because we were talking about, sort of supernatural things and fasting and.
That's an interesting variant. I haven't had a chance to really look at it. Hey, how's it going, Helga? I saw you in the comments in there earlier. So this is one of those things that are on the list to look at some point, because I know it's a question of whether we're referring to a people or to a geography. And I think there was a lot of confusion surrounding what was being referenced and where. So again, I can't speak to it entirely. I'm just aware of its complexity, but I just haven't looked at it to be able to solve the issue. So But yeah, oh yeah, you got Matthew 17:21. That's what it was.
Oh yeah.
Now that was the other thing that I kind of got since you have the NASB up there. Surprisingly, and I know you wouldn't recommend this at all because I understand you're a King James guy. But I've come to the conclusion that if you're going to get a critical text English Bible, that the NASB 95 specifically is probably the best critical text to get. And the reason being is because all of these missing verses that we're talking about, they're actually in the body of the text. Now they put square brackets around it. I get that, and we know what that means. But at least they're in the body of the text. So your average Joe who doesn't care about anything textual critical is just going to read it as scripture anyway. So I think if you're stuck with a critical text, the NASB 95 is probably the best one. Now that's my opinion. Now I would say go New King James Version. You'd say go King James Version. That's fine. But yeah, that's something I found it interesting. So if you take a look at the proclamation of the woes in Matthew, is that 20? Matthew 20, the proclamation 23? Of the woes. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. 23. Yeah. If you take a look at that, one of the woes entirely is skipped out. So there's 7 woes instead of 8. It's the one about devouring widows' houses. Yeah, so that one is not in the critical text, but it's in the Textus Receptus, the Byzantine text type, like all these things. But what's really interesting is in the NASB 95, right? It's got a heading there, and the heading calls it the 8 woes. So even though they put that one woe in square brackets, the heading still says the 8 woes. So I was like, that's really interesting. Kind of sending some mixed signals there, but
yeah,
it's interesting nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Like, have you seen any of the videos that I've done recently about Mark Ward? He's been talking about the New King James. Have you seen any of those videos?
No. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I got to be honest. I see 4 hours on there, and I'm like, okay, time to go on.
Oh, absolutely, and I don't blame you. Like I do the same with everyone else. But I noticed this video here. I'll just find this one because I found this the other day. Textus Receptus. Actually, I think it's under Mark Ward. And I might even show you what I do, because sometimes people don't realize you can do this. So if you type in Mark Ward, you can go to filters and go like this week. So it doesn't just show you all these popular ones. You can look at like
right on.
Like what Brett said, and so I'll type in like King James, or sometimes my own name, and it's like people are talking about me here, because sometimes I want to respond. And so yeah, you've got a video there 5 days ago.
Tim Frisch.
Or this guy.
Oh, that's 5 days ago?
Yeah, so that's not... Yeah, so that must be someone looking at your older video.
Oh, I've seen that guy around. Yeah, he doesn't like the NKJV, and he makes it known.
Okay. So I'm just trying to find this one here. I can't seem to find it. Maybe it's a short, that's why.
Okay.
I'll just see if I can... Yeah, so anyway, I think... Yeah, anyway, someone was just pointing out that Mark Ward was pulling one of the pastors, I think it might be Sorensen or someone like that, over the polls and saying he was critical of the New King James. And Mark Ward apparently said that he had been reaching out to this guy. And so they just asked him plainly, has he ever reached out to you? And he said, never. He's never reached out to me. And it was just a bit strange, it was so anyway, I'd been going through Mark Ward's material on the New King James, and just sort of pointing out that he's not really dealing with some strong argumentation. He seems to be dealing with some very weak arguments.
Sure.
Like, finding someone who's, you know, sort of up there in the King James ranks, who's sort of made a bit of an article and going with that, where there are some people with some strong beefs with the New King James.
Sure. Yeah, I see that. I think one of the things I watched one of Mark Ward's videos on the NKJV, and it was I forget what the title was, but it was something along the lines of like, you know, is the NKJV from a critical text background or something like that, and so like. Disclaimer, right? I like Mark. I talk to him all the time. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Love him bits. I know you guys have your differences, and that's fine. But I think when it comes to the New King James Version and the claim of, you know, critical text stuff is oftentimes, and I know one example I got from you actually was 1 John 3:16. For this is the love of God, right? And it being in italics or not being part, it's not in the New King James Version. And I can kind of understand seeing that as a critical text reading, but then not all the TRs have that specific word there. And I think someone in the comments even suggested that the KJV had it in italics there. The suggestion is that the received text doesn't actually have of God, Theou, in the Greek text behind it. So when it comes to the New King James Version, I don't see it as a critical text edition. The footnotes, you can say there's definitely some critical text footnotes in there for sure. And there might be like a reading or two that matches up. And usually when that occurs, when there's a matchup with the critical text editions of the New Testament, it's often a translational issue. And the famous one, right, is 1 Corinthians 1:18. What is it? Those who are saved versus those who are being saved.
Yeah.
And actually I had Mark Ward on the channel. We discussed that one. I'm actually starting to think that the King James Version saying those who are saved, it seems like English in 1611, at least when you survey the entirety of the King James Bible, it does not use the grammar construction of beings, those who are being. Our being is not something you see at all in the King James Version. So there's a part of me that's wondering if we have what Mark Ward would consider a false friend, but for a grammar instead of for a meaning. So when it says those who are saved, does King James English use are saved in a similar way that we would use are being saved? And I wasn't able to find anything specifically conclusive on that. I'd like to do a little bit more digging on that because that could be what's happening. But yeah, it's a little theory that I've been thinking of.
Yeah, and because I was having an interesting conversation with Jordan Krikeli, and so he's over in Africa at the moment, and it was probably about a year ago, and we sort of come to the conclusion that you can get are being saved from the Greek.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's a bit sort of like you can also say that Mary is the mother of God, you know, sort of thing. It's like it opens up a can of worms.
Sure.
It's not like it is a possible reading, but it is you can defend it from the Greek, but it's sort of said in a way that can be grating and cause people to go, well, yeah, we're sort of earning our salvation, or that can be read into it. We're earning our salvation, sort of thing. And so, but yeah, definitely, I've always said that the New King James is a Textus Receptus based Bible. I know some people are like, no, it's. Some people are just ignorant and they say, oh, it's a critical text thing, or it's a majority. It's not even a majority text thing. It's a TR Bible, but there are a few little places here and there where it's like either they overlooked something or it was like a choice to not go with something. But I think what from my studies of the New King James, what I seem to realize is they feel that the italics always have or always represent an omission in the Greek, where sometimes the King James Version italics actually were designed to show you where earlier Textus Receptus editions didn't have the words, like Stephanus. So if we look at, say, 1 John 2:23, where it has he who acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. That's all in one long italic in the 1611. But Beza has it. Beza fully has that in the Greek. So, but it's actually Stephanus. So I think they actually purposely did that to show the reader that we've looked into this issue. What the words that we've got there, we believe they're faithful, but it's not in an earlier TR edition. So I think sometimes when the New King James guys are going through their text, I think one of the first things they might have done was gone through and gone, well, let's get sort of rid of the italics and put a line through it, where sometimes those italics aren't just there to help us construct an English sentence properly, but they're actually showing us where there's older TR editions that didn't have the word. And so I'm not sure if they knew that. And that's probably the main reason why of God is omitted in 1 John 3:16.
3:16, yeah.
Because that's the next chapter after that really big long italic in 1 John 2:23, which involves all those words. He who acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also, all in italic. I think Blaney went through and said, hang on, you've got that in italic. Why don't you put this one in italic? Because Scrivener, Stephanus doesn't have it in his 1550 of God. So he put that in italic. But I think the New King James guys went, it's not in the Greek, and sort of crossed it out, but it's in Beza. And so I think just by them not looking or understanding the italics properly has caused this issue in the New King James. So it's an interesting concept. But.
Yeah. I did have you dived into that at all at length, or is this just kind of like a theory that you come up with?
Yeah. I guess I could probably show you if you want me to jump into it.
Yeah, let's take a look. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so 3:16. So yeah, if we look at the original 1611, there's no italic there. It says, hereby I proceed with the love of God. Then Blaney, he put an italic there. But I was trying to put myself in the shoes of Blaney. He had just put the italics in 1 John 2:23, which I might get up here.
Okay.
Rather than explain it. In 1 John 2:23. The italics here in the original King James, well, this is Beza's earlier edition. He doesn't have he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also in his Greek, but later on he does.
In italics.
So in the 1598 he's got it. In the 1565 he doesn't have it. So in the King James, this is how it looks.
I'm not seeing it. You're not sharing your screen.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay. And you missed it. That's it. Sorry, mate. No, I'm only joking. So it has here, this is just the chapter before. So it has this whole italic in the 1611. He that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. So Blaney, in his update, he kept those words but put them in the italic font that we're familiar with today. So then he would have gone to the next chapter, and where it says of God, that doesn't appear in the 1550 text. But it does appear in Beza in his 1598. And so that's why he would have put it in. He would have felt like, oh, well, they've done it in the chapter before. Why don't we put it in this one? So what that did that caused it to be in italics. But then we see the New King James just omits it completely.
Right. Yeah.
And I think they've done that just because they've seen it's italic and they've just assumed that it's not in the underlying Greek. They've assumed that it's just read into the text somehow.
Right.
Because they often know footnote to show that it's omitted or anything. And so it's quite strange.
Pull up the image with the received text on it. Is Love got an article on it? Yeah. There it is. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Look at that. Toe capital. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's got the article, the word the attached to love. The reason why that's significant is because if you go back to the text, the New King James doesn't have it articulated. So there's almost a sense in which if it's articulated, it's speaking of a specific love. And so by adding in of God, you're saying that this is not just love, but it's the specific love of God. And so the article there would be pointing us back to, in the context, it would be pointing us back to God. So that's, so basically, if we go with the theory that the King James Version translators, well, they didn't italicize it. So I guess that theory is kind of out of the water. But you could say that of God was added to clarify where the article goes for to agapito. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, but the NKJV doesn't have the word "the" in front of love, so that's just a quick observation.
Yeah, and that's interesting, and because there are times where the New King James does omit a word. But replaces it with like a semicolon, and things like that. And so because it's sort of read into the context. But this is
like the word "they," right? They, like delta epsilon. It's like a pause marker. We would say that it. What's the term? There's a whole book. Stephen Levinson, I think, wrote a discourse grammar, and he talks about those little words there. And oftentimes they're not translated, but they become like a new paragraph or a full stop or something like that. So anyway, but that's totally beside the point.
Yeah, but it is a very important thing what you're saying, because it's exactly what happens in Galatians 2:20 with the verse that is, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And so the New King James has, I am crucified with Christ, but it doesn't have nevertheless I live. And so it's, I'll just show you the.
Sounds like a Mende construction there.
So they put the semicolon there, and they omit the word nevertheless. Yeah, nevertheless I live.
Yep.
So it says, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. So it says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And so I've sort of written out the King James is saying 6 things, and the New King James is sort of saying 4 things. So but the exact issue that you're talking about, like the there, is nevertheless. So that seems to be regulated to become a semicolon in that verse. Yeah.
In fact, I'm willing to say that it's probably, just judging by the sentence, it would be a Mende construction, which would be, I can validate that right now real quick. Because the 2 parts of the clause work together, like over here on the one hand and on the other, that kind of thing. No, I'm wrong. Nope. That's Galatians 2:20, right?
Yes.
Nope, not a Mende construction. Interesting. Very cool.
But yeah, that's an interesting one. I heard you mention the there. Which is the issue there. But I'll just wrap up this one here. So hereby proceed with the love of God is in the 1611. Blaney's probably just trying to make the italics a bit more uniform. So they're not just where there's no Greek, but it's where there's sometimes all the TRs don't have it. New King James has come along and doesn't have the words of God at all, but it's in it's in Beza's text, which is here, and in his Latin translation, it's in the Vulgate as well that he has.
Yep.
It's in Scrivener's. He has it, but he has it a number 6 there because Westcott and Hort actually omit that. It's an omission of Westcott and Hort.
Right.
And so, coming back to this, the issue is because it's hereby proceed with the love of God, because he laid down his life for us. So the closest antecedent for the he is God. So this is actually a verse that talks about the deity of Christ, that God laid down his life for us. So it's a bit like Acts chapter 20, verse 28, where it says,
I see. Interesting.
Us with his blood.
Yeah.
And so, so that's one of the issues where it's changed of God is gone. So it does take out the deity of Christ there, and there's no footnote in the New King James. So this is one of the things where I would say to Mark Ward is a strong verse to, and I read the New King James for many years. When I first got saved, I read the New King James. I memorized it. I've read certain parts of the Bible. I've read some of the chapters like over 500 times. Like I would read Hebrews 11 every day. I would read it every day for years and years and years. And so I know the New King James really well, but I sort of have segued off to a King James position and things like things. That's why I focus on the minutia. So because I've always sort of had a bit of a TR background, but
well, that's good. Well, I'm not going to stay too much longer. It is already 10:30. I was hoping not to go past 10. So that's okay. So thanks for allowing me to come on. Just kind of off the cuff as bored this afternoon. So why not go hang out with Nick for a little bit?
No, I really appreciate it, Dwayne. And we're going to be doing our debate, my debate with James Snap Jr.
That's
in a week's time. So what I might do is before then, maybe what we can do is I'll try and add you to a StreamYard that is like a team StreamYard or something like that. So you see everything that I'm seeing instead of, so you can become like the main guy. If that doesn't work, I'll just give you my access and then I'll join you. That'll probably work better, but I'll work that out during the week, and I'll contact you, and maybe we can set aside 10 minutes during the week just to make
sure. I'm sure it won't be that difficult. These things are typically pretty easy to once you've done one, you've done them all kind of deal. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm trying to be as partial as I can leading up to the debate, so I don't weigh myself toward one person or the other. So you're both men that I've watched and respect, so it shouldn't be a problem. I should be able to remain totally impartial. I won't make any jabs at anybody.
To hold you back, but I really appreciate you moderating. It's a big thing that you're doing, and I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's gonna be fun. It'll be my first moderated debate, first time moderating a debate. So I'm sure it's not that hard. It can't be that hard.
Yeah, I'm doing one tomorrow with Peter Van Cleek and TurretinFan. I've got to.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, TurretinFan's been looking at a lot of Peter Van Cleek's the debate between Van Cleek and White. It was an interesting debate to watch. I think the presuppositions were totally ignored. You probably saw my summary of the debate, but they James White totally ignored the presupposition that Van Cleek was coming to, and that's kind of where the debate should have been, but it wasn't. And then Van Cleek, I appreciate where he's coming from, but he needs to get rid of that algorithm argument. It's just so subjective, and it just doesn't make sense. People don't understand it, so it's not. I mean, you know, I'm not a TR guy per se, but we're so close. We're so close, right? So I would just offer this to Peter Van Cleek. Don't use that argument. Just don't use it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's really complicated. None of us understand what you're saying there, and it makes it very difficult. So that's really my only.
Oh, whoops! I think Dwayne's dropped out, so he might have been like ready to press the button, and he's gotten so excited that he's pressed it, and he's out of the stream. So, but that's cool. He was heading out the door anyway. Okay, so that was good. That was interesting. Okay, so where are we going from here? I'll quickly tidy up a few things. So now I've got 600 things open. So Helg is talking about the Greek construction there. R-save takes both the verb and the participle into account. So that's very interesting. And Helg has written a very good, PDF argument of the issue. James Sheffield said, why was it added? Those ninja scribes again. Street Dog says, there are faith come from us towards God, or is God also our faith? Or does our faith come from God, come from us towards God, or is God also our faith? Well, that's an interesting thing. Calvinists would say that God gives you the faith to believe, where other people would believe that we all have a measure of faith, and it depends what you put that in. You put that in God, you will have salvation. I'm doing my head in from the debates. Yeah, there's lots to be said there. Thanks, Dwayne. Not sure what happened there. Yeah, I didn't boot you. Your battery died on your camera. Yep. That was great timing, actually. It was just like you were doing your last little thing and you left. So lucky it didn't happen before that. Nice to see. Nice visit there, Dwayne. Nice guy. So that's great. We've got all that happening. And yeah, so what was I talking about? I was actually talking about quite a few things. I'll just drop that down. Okay, so we'll go through that. Yeah, I was talking about Bryan Ross's material, that it'd be great to go through from, around the time of Erasmus and sort of go through to maybe the end of Erasmus's life, which is probably the beginning of Stephanus and that. We want to focus in on that time around Aldous, Erasmus, their influences, who was around them, who were the main characters, and we want to listen to scholarship talking about this type of thing. I think that will really help. Matt Singleton said, didn't know you were having the show. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, Matthew 16, I think he was here. I think he's gone now. So, yeah, I've just been 4 hours, Matt. So I'm probably going to pull the pin very soon. But I thought I'd mention that we are having these debates coming up. So tomorrow, my first moderated debate. So I'm the moderator. We got TurretinFan and Peter Van Cleek, and the question is: has God preserved the Greek New Testament in a single printed edition? So I'll put that link into the description or into the chat there. You can all have a look at that. And so yeah, that's going to be happening in 18 hours time. So I'm going to get up early and be ready for that one. That's going to be exciting. And then what we have the following week, Dwayne Green is going to be moderating on this channel, and it's James Snap Jr. versus Nick Sayers. So this is Friday, July 19th, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I've got New York City time, just in case people don't, sometimes I say Eastern Standard Time, they're like, what, daylight savings? Or, so just to get rid of the confusion, it's like New York time, and we'll just stick with that. So yeah, that's happening. So we've got a debate on, is the King James Bible 100% accurate? So this can be very interesting. So apart from that, I think I'm going to go, but thanks for joining us for this first video on the Byzantine school. In our next video, we are going to go through the video on Aldus Manutius, and we're going to check out who one of Erasmus's good friends were, what his work was, and how he saved civilization. So that's a very interesting one. Matt said, let him know I want to challenge him to a debate. Okay, so Matthew 16. I think he left quite a long time ago. So yeah, a few hours ago now. Probably, yeah, almost 3 hours ago he left. So, well, that was his last comment, I think. And he just said a few little things about the Catholic Church. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Believe and be baptized. I was like, well, yeah, you believe. And it's like it says in Mark. You go Mark 16, which a lot of people don't believe is in the Gospels, but it most certainly is. Mark 16 here. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And so clearly he that believeth is related to, but he that believeth not shall be damned. Here it says he that believeth, and then it says and is baptized. So this is very clearly talking about the progression on after you believe, you walk in obedience to Christ to be baptized. That doesn't make you saved, but this is a person who he has believed, and then he's continuing on in the things of God. But if you don't believe, you're damned. So clearly it doesn't say, but he that believeth not and is not baptized is damned. So it doesn't say that at all, does it? So some of these verses can be twisted and turned to defend certain doctrines. But anyway, I think I'm going to pull the pin. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you again tomorrow for this debate here. And I am looking forward to that. Okay. I'm going to play my little tune.